Well, first off, I usually start talk because I think it's a very good start to talk a little bit about history or a lot about history because I
Yeah,
find
yeah.
it fascinating and so on. So I want to start with what was your first contact with the fire service for yourself? Like yeah, really way back.
Yeah, yeah. Look, I mean, I'm the guy that if I was hiring someone for the fire service, I wouldn't have hired me.
Yeah,
Um, I left school, well, actually, when I was in my second last year of school,
yeah,
which we call year 11, um, I applied to join the army, our officer training at a place called Duntroon. And I was devastated when I didn't get in to get a scholarship for my final year of school. There was three of us that applied, three friends. One did get in. He ended up doing 25 years in the paratroopers, but that's another story. But
yeah,
so when I finished, I didn't know what I wanted to do when I finished school. So I was 18 when I finished. I I got into university to do communications, and I was going to be a photojournalist.
yeah.
That was going to be it. The time came for me to actually start the course and get all that, and enroll. And instead, I decided to have a year off. And in that year off, I just did odd jobs. I worked as a carpet layer, and a labourer, and a this and a that. And I worked in the bank, which was the job then you had when you didn't have a job. That anyone could get a job in the bank. So I was a clerk in the bank, making mistakes with other people's money. And towards the end of that year, I decided that I would become a teacher. So I enrolled in PE and science, high school teacher.
Yeah.
And for the next 2.5 years, that's what I did. Um, Now, I had the start of my third and final year. At that time, it was 3 years to get a teaching diploma. And I would have come out as a PE teacher and a science teacher, even though science wasn't my strong suit by any stretch. And I was going to be a teacher because they got good holidays, they got good
Yeah.
hours, and I could do sport. you
Yeah.
know. So, in other words, I really didn't know what I wanted to do. And I remember at that time. So if I take me back to September 1986, I'm going to teachers college. I have my wife to be at the time was pregnant with twins, and they were due January. This is September the year before. They were due January 87. We were living essentially in a garage at my parents' place, and I wanted some money. and and I remember I went to a family barbecue, and my my wife's uncle, who wasn't that different in age, sort of said, "Oh, look, the fire brigade's hiring." And for the first time in my life, at the age of 20, I said the word fire brigade.
Yeah.
I said, "Oh, what's that about?" And
Yeah.
he said they get 4 days on, 4 days off. And I said, keep talking. And I said, how much do they earn? And he said, well, they earn $23,000 a year. Now, a teacher at that time was getting 19,000 straight out
Yeah.
of college.
Yeah.
So that was looking good.
Yeah.
All right, okay, this sounds great. So what you did at the time was you filled in a little form in the paper. It went out in the paper.
Yeah.
And then you sent that in. They sent back a date, and you all gathered. Hundreds of guys and girls would gather and do this entrance examination that went for 2 or 3 hours.
Yeah.
And actually, I was the first year, so I sat that in January 1987, and I remember going there, and we were waiting to go into this big uni lecture room at the University of New South Wales to do the examination. And there was mechanical aptitude and mathematics and English and cognitive testing, essentially, IQ style sort of cognitive testing. I remember looking around and saying, "There's hundreds of people waiting to go in." I said, "Gee, this fire brigade cape is pretty, pretty
Yeah. Popular.
popular." And then
Yeah.
the doors opened, and 400 people walked out, and 400 people walked in, and this went over a whole sort of week.
Yeah.
So it's always been, and that was 33 years ago, and it's always been for the 100 jobs my organisation has each year. We have 6,000 to 7,000 people apply, so it's always been.
Yeah.
Anyway, this was unknown to me at the time. I was a kid, I was just going to nail this exam and see what came of it. It appealed to me from a point of view. I've never visited a fire station. I'd never talked to a firefighter, and here I was sitting doing an exam for the job. I just had this, you sort of know what firefighters do.
Yeah.
They fight fires.
Yeah.
And what appealed to me was having wanted to join the military in a sense.
Yeah.
In hindsight, probably the best thing that ever happened to me was that I didn't join the military. But I was okay with paramilitary,
Yeah.
And, but I suppose the danger, the excitement, the doing something, but that's what appealed to me. Look, some people say it's about helping the community and all that sort of stuff. And look, there's an element of that without a doubt. There's a great pride I take in that, because that is a function of our work. But I must admit, that's not why I joined.
No, I would say nobody, but that's the honest answer.
Yeah,
most people, they join for other reasons. If you want to help people, you tend to go for like hospital care or something. Like
absolutely.
If you truly want to work with that, it's just the nature of the game.
Yeah, and so I did it because I thought this would be an exciting job and it had good conditions, without a doubt. And so I went through that procedure. I got called back to there was a medical and a physical and so on. And it was back in a time where, and things have changed enormously, but basically my interview was 3 questions. I still remember the questions. It was, I'd just done the medical, and we sort of had an agility test. We had a bike, a 12-minute ride, and we had the doctor checking things. And they said, right, you've got 15 minutes to go to St. Vincent's Hospital and get a chest x-ray. I believe that was for tuberculosis check or for superannuation or something. And in a sense, it was sort of like that first thing, I'm probably already in, no matter what happens at the end. And I was white Anglo-Saxon male, so I fitted that description at the time, certainly. And I remember sitting there, and another friend of mine who also got in, and we weren't prepared. We weren't dressed like we were going for an interview, and I sort of had some nice clothes on at the time. And my mate had a Three Stooges T-shirt on. I'll never forget it. And he's going to an interview for his job with this Nuck 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 T-shirt on. And but it didn't matter. Once again, he fitted the demographic. Yeah. And so I had 3 senior officers in front of me, and they said, they asked 3 questions. That's it. One said, so you play football? And I said, yeah, I played football to a certain level. And they said, tell us about that. I said, well, blah, blah, blah. The next one said, look, you may see some gory and bloody things during this job, injuries and things like that. How do you feel about that? And I'm 20, right? And I said, so the second question, I said, I don't know. I said, I've seen a compound foot fracture on the football field. I think I'll be okay. Yeah. Right answer. Then the last question was, you have shift work. What will you and your family think about shift work? And I answered the same way. I don't know. I think I'll be okay. Yeah. Excellent. Next. And a couple of months later, I get a letter saying, to turn up and get measured for a uniform, and you're a recruit. And I never even thought that I wouldn't end up getting through that procedure. I was young, I was sort of confident. I was at university. Throw a test at me and I'd do that. I was a very sport type of guy. I was doing PE teaching. So I deferred teaching in case this caper didn't work out, and the rest is sort of history. Yeah. So that had me in the fire service without. Now, it would be suicide to attempt to join our organisation without knowing everything possible about the job you're about to do, about the fire service, visiting a fire station, probably knowing more about firefighting than people who have been in the job for 20 years. That's what we expect now if someone says, And the demographics really changed. We had to be younger than 32. Yeah. That was a superannuation thing, I believe, at the time. So we were all kids. We were early 20s. The oldest in my class of 20 was 26. Now that demographic's another 10 years older. Yeah. It's so hard to get in. We're probably late 20s, early 30s. There is no age limit, of course. Yeah. But how does a young guy, how would I have competed against someone who's got 2 degrees, or someone that's managed a business, or, so we have a very different demographic, and there's a lot of discussion about, has that made a different firefighter? Yeah. Are they less capable? Are they more capable? And it's an interesting to sort of look back and, but I came from an era where we worked on our own cars. There was a thing called a carburetor, and you could fix your own car, to a society where I don't fix my own car anymore. Yeah. You don't do any of that. So that's the person we get now. So there's a different type of training to prepare that person. But I never looked back, and that's how I ended up in the fire service.
No.
I had interviewed someone as a recruit, and they said, "No,
Well, it depends on who's recruiting.
You know,
What do you look for? But it's interesting because I never wanted to join the fire service either. I mean, I even did the military service as an airport firefighter simply because we had 1 week on, 1 week off, compared to the other military service, which was 9 to 5 during the days and back home in the weekend maybe. So it was just a phenomenal schedule. You could sit indoors and play computer games all day, be on standby for an airport that nothing happens. It was just a dream job, and go wee with the fire truck was just fun. I mean, it was nothing more than that. And when I got out of that, I had no intention of joining a fire brigade. It wasn't part of my radar. I never even looked it up. Really? How you became a firefighter. I have no idea how you became a firefighter outside of the fire service. So I applied for. I went to Gutfish in Norway to get some money. Like I did that for 4 months. Oh, yeah. Just gutting fish.
I thought you were saying you went to some place called Gutfish.
Yeah, no. I gut fish. Like I manually gut fish on salmon, just salmon. Anyway, for 4 months, and during that time, I did two things. First off, I applied to become a sea captain at a university, and I got in. So I got the papers that I get good grades. So I got in on that, which is a good college in Sweden. And I was thinking, like, I've never even been on I've been on a lake, on a small yacht, well, like a rowing boat.
I think you look like a sea captain.
Yeah, well, now I could maybe pass on the sea captain look. But I mean, I was going like,
a pipe and a parrot. Yeah, exactly.
And a Sylvester. Yeah. No, I would probably have been a pirate in that case. But arg, mate. With a wooden, cut off my own leg, just have a wooden, just to play the part, wooden leg.
With your leg sort of tied up behind it. So
yeah, just to play the part, yeah. No, but I was sitting there going like, I have never been on an ocean. I've never even been on a large lake. I've rowed a ferry, but I have literally no concept of. I don't even know if I get seasick. Like I'm going to be a sea captain. So I had a little bit of a. But I was drawn again. I was like you. I was 20 or something. I was drawn at 19. I was drawn to the schedule. For instance, I was going like half a year off, half a year on. Could it be, or month on and a month off? It's those kind of schedules if you're a sea captain, which I really enjoyed. Like I wanted that consecutive free time, and I felt like the job sounded interesting. Like you were in charge of the vessel, and you just responsible for safety, and of course driving the ship if it's complicated and so on. So it sounded interesting, but I got cold feet. Like I maybe I should like. Go on a study trip, like actually visit a boat or something.
Maybe I should take a long distance.
Yeah, but just tag along for like a day or two and see if this actually. And honestly, I think that I would have probably liked it, but when I got a family, I would probably have hated it. So now I couldn't imagine being away for a month and coming back.
Look,
and I'm a 4-year-old.
We get a lot of military guys coming to the fire service as recruits, which when I was in training, and very, very capable guys, and in their early 30s, mid-30s, and they just go, you know what, I loved it, whether I'm in a trench or up to my neck in mud and all that sort of stuff. And they said, but you get to a point where you just want a normal job, and and a family, and
No, I think that was one of the things I'm happy about that I didn't. I think I would have loved the job as sea captain. I think it's still a fascinating job on a lot of sense because it's a small island. It's a small, community you run. Like it's a sort of and it's not like an airplane where you just sit up front and you're in charge of the airplane, but you just drive a bus. It's a complicated bus, but it's still just a bus. Yeah. But on a ship, you're like you walk around. You're responsible for cargo, whatever it might be. But so the point being, I got cold feet. Yeah, it's a small ecosystem. But anyway, so a guy I did the military service with said, I I applied to this new training. It was the first 2-year program in Sweden, and I was like, and I sent an application the same day, and then I got accepted, and it was sort of like, okay,
Yeah.
I'll do that then. I've never had a dream. So it's interesting. And a lot of people I talk to, like in the world, and I talk about fire nerds, I would say most of them have never had a dream job of becoming a firefighter.
No.
It was something they stumbled upon, like sort of like you and so on. Like it just came
I
on,
think
like,
that in some respects that may even be that might happen more frequently in the volunteer ranks.
yeah.
Whether it was a tradition for the family, or whether that was that, you know, I just think I know with our retained firefighters, you know, our part-time paid firefighters, I don't know how these guys do it. I mean, it's amazing because they've got their full-time jobs, and yet they give this commitment to both the community and so on. And you know, it's certainly not a financial, you know, there's nothing financial there. And you know, so I think that, you know, on average, if you're talking to one of those guys as opposed to a full-on sort of career firefighter, I think you're going to get a different mix of why they're doing this. And you know, I don't think if I wasn't a full-time firefighter, I don't think I'd be a part-time firefighter. I don't know. I
don't think either, simply because I wouldn't have known what I was looking for.
No, I wouldn't even known there was such a thing.
No,
you know,
it would be part of
I saw
my
a
radar.
truck from a distance. I remember Mum used to say to us when we heard a siren to hold the button on your shirt, and that was sort of like it was nearly like saying a prayer for whoever's in trouble.
Oh.
You're sort of, it was this weird sort of thing. I don't know where it came from, but I remember doing. She says, you know, when you heard a siren, and a truck would go by, and you sort of look at it. But I never even thought, wow, I'd like to be one of those guys.
No.
I never drew pictures of it. I drew lots of tanks and planes and things like that.
I wanted to be a truck driver when I was up until very late. Yeah, I want to be a truck driver. But it was basically my intellect that said, like, that's not a future, Lars. Like, don't be a truck driver. But my heart said truck driver.
Truck driver.
Yeah, and I was long. I was up in college. Like I loved trucks. I didn't even draw trucks and so on, but I just had this fascinating. I just wanted to be a truck driver. Like it's very strange. And then my intellect said you shouldn't be. They should be an engineer. So I went to in college a natural, you know, a science program, and you should be an engineer in some ways because that you make more money and it's a better job and so on. But still, my heart goes, oh, there's a truck. Want to drive it?
It's funny. In at teachers' college, which I didn't finish, mind you, I still had half a year to go, well, 3/4 of a year to go, and I never went back. I never went back. I have other qualifications, which is more, you know, in terms of what we call training and assessment qualifications, which you need to have to be a registered training organisation in Australia. But I never went back, and I probably should have, you know. But it's sort of that.
Was teacher school? What's your education to teacher in Australia? Was it something that you have had? When you became a fire instructor, do you think you have a lot of value from your teacher education, or was it more?
Oh, look, I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure. I was 19, 20, 21.
Yeah.
I was, look, you know, the male brain isn't formed until you're 25.
I would say 30, but okay.
Yeah, depends. If you still want to be a captain of a ship or a driver of a truck. But, I grew up very quickly in my 20s because I had twins when I was 21, and that makes you grow up pretty quickly. And that makes you sort of settle down and do those things like, you know, to support that family. So I grew up fairly quickly. But I mean, it's interesting that my own kids, those twins are 33 years of age now. And my youngest is 27, and I've got grandchildren. And, you know, the things I saw at the age of 20 and 21, once I had joined the job, I couldn't see or imagine my own children at that age dealing with some of those things. But I grew up fairly quickly. But what I was going to say before is I did science. I actually went to the Catholic College of Education. We're running this teacher's diploma, and I came from a Catholic school system. And at that campus, they only had, if you wanted to do PE, you had to do science or maths or religion. I wasn't doing religion, and I wasn't doing maths. So even though I did geology as my final science, so no chemistry, no physics, and suddenly I'm floundering at teachers' college. But my grade point average was high enough through the PE stream to keep on pushing through. So I would much rather have done humanities, English. I majored in art and history in high school. So, but because I wanted to do PE, I had to do the science side of it. And strangely enough, I end up teaching science to some degree anyway within the fire service, you know. But it wasn't my first choice. No. And I still see the science as a means to an end. You know, I don't really care. It doesn't excite me as much as impress me. And the only exciting part about the science within firefighting is that's a means of an end to be more effective and be better at my job, rather than a means in itself, if that makes sense. So, you know, I'm happy for other people to do that sort of back end and then read the research and say, you know what, they've done the back end. How do I then make this valuable on the fireground is much more what I'm interested in. Where some people, it's just the pure science that just, you know, they just love. And
nuts and bolts.
I'm not saying I don't find that amazing, but it's not the driving force to me as an instructor. And I think that's what makes our job so challenging as fire educators, is that there's this back end that you've got to understand to some degree. But, you know, there's this other bit of, well, some people know the back end really well, but they struggle to explain it, or they struggle to find ways to explain it, or they
or just interpret it. I mean,
what's relevant?
Yeah, put it in context. Now, I think that's interesting, and we'll get more into that, because I want to talk about this connection between who simplifies and to what degree do we simplify, and what is. It is a very challenging bit.
It's what fascinates me.
It's fascinating, and there's not a clear answer because it's so contextualized. But I want to go back again to some history. So I have two things I want to follow up on what you said. The first thing I want to talk about is recruit school, and specifically fire training. So how did fire training look like in terms of fire behavior, like live fire? You know, I know. I sort of know the answer, but I want to, get it on tape so I can hold it to you in court. So what is like fire training look like in fire behavior, live fire? And the second one is like how, in terms of methods of the actual practice, like what was sort of the, this is how you do firefighting.
Are you talking back then or now?
Back then.
Okay, back then. Okay, well, that's real easy. That's real easy. That one. Anyone that would have seen a presentation of mine over the last decade would have seen a picture I love to show of me in the uniform we wore, which was Lion Tamer's outfit, we used to call it, with the brass buttons.
Did you used to call it that? Was it called afterwards?
No, that's what we called it then as well.
They called it then also? So you knew that there was something...
Well, no, look, you're right. There was a day when I remember having a realization. I was sitting in the watchroom at a fire station, and this would have been 1988. And if you were on watchroom duty... So
you were just on, you joined in 87, so...
That's right.
You hadn't been...
So I'd only been in the job a couple of years. That uniform, which we had since the turn of the century before, right? The only change was there was a metal helmet, that famous British designed by Massey Shaw. We had them up till 1962, I believe. And after that, it was a very lightweight plastic helmet. And I see them in Europe as well, with that longer at the back and shorter at the front. We used to turn it around to sort of stop radiation in defensive positions. But so very lightweight. But other than that, it was exactly the same. Just heavy wool trousers and top boots and this jacket. And underneath we'd have a T-shirt or another jacket. And now that changed in 92 when we got a single layer cotton over trouser. And the first thing we all did was cut the heavyweight trousers underneath down into shorts. Because why would we want more than one layer?
It's hot.
it's hot, you know, it's which is the biggest bugbear, but we'll talk about that later for me with our current firefighters, you know. Why do I have to wear this hot uniform, you know? Anyway, so that's all I've ever seen a firefighter wear. So that's what they wore, and there must be good reason for that. That was my thinking from when I joined anyway. And this must be the best stuff. I mean, they couldn't have done this for 100 years without working out this must be the best thing possible. Now, back then too, if I walked into a fire station, you would not find fire magazines lying around. You know, trade magazines like Fire Engineering or Firehouse or whatever it may be. In fact, there was no such thing in Australia anyway, right? Each organisation, each statewide fire service looked after themselves. So the only magazines you found lying around the station were not fire magazines. So there was not even a point of comparison to pick up a magazine and say, why do I look like this? And this guy in England or this guy in the United States or Sweden for that matter looks completely different, you know. You didn't have YouTube, you didn't have any of that. So unless you saw it, and TV wasn't showing it, you know, your broadcast networks weren't showing you this stuff. So there's no way I could even really, unless you, I mean, look, obviously there was ways you could, but you had to dig deep and you had to.
You didn't really even know to look for.
No,
you didn't even have a reason to even look.
No, not at all, not at all. So, you know, so the training college. So it was back then the course would have been about 6 months, I imagine. Most of it, I must admit, was polishing brass. We still had brass nozzles with no shut-off, our standard branches, we called them. We still had all of our standpipes, because our hydrants are below street, so we would ship a standpipe into a hydrant. Any sort of metal connecting devices were brass. So we would polish brass. The buttons here were brass. Our belt buckle was brass, and we had to look the part. So every Friday was clean-up day. So there's Friday gone. We did lectures. There was no curriculum, certainly not Australia-wide. We now have the Australian Fire Authorities Council, which sets, we have, respond to urban fire, suppress urban fire. We have these levels that, firefighters reach, which has been essentially agreed to across the country, very loosely, might I add. But each organisation would provide evidence to meet the certain competencies. Back then, there was none of that. So you had some station officers that were assigned as your instructor, and basically they taught you what they thought was necessary when you graduated. I fought 3 fires from memory. While I was at the training college. One was a car fire. We were still lighting cars up. This is like 2 kilometres from the Harbour Bridge, in the middle of busy Sydney. Mind you, a very different area, which now has gentrified and incredibly expensive. Sydney's an incredibly expensive place to buy a house. But then it was sort of light industry, and there was a meat factory there and a blood and bone factory. And, so we lit a fire up and we put that out. Now, that ain't so hard when there's no exposures. You just put water on it till it goes out. The other fire was your classic LPG sort of replicating an industrial type of gas flange fire. So we advanced on that with a fog and, forward. Then someone reached in for an imaginary type of valve, and then you
which are positioned right at the flame. There should be a valve there, and there's no other valve you can close. Go like
the second fire I fought, I've never fought in 33 years. I've never. Now, maybe if I was an industrial firefighter, maybe, I don't know. But
I don't think so.
That was, but it was easy to set up. It was relatively safe. You felt like a firefighter, and you saw flame. And then the only other fire was, I remember before we started BA training, we went up into our 7-story tower as a concrete tower, and they put a straw bale in the middle of one of the rooms there, and we all sort of crowded in, the 20 of us, and they lit it, and then they closed the door, and we were left in there, and it's sort of starting to smoke, and the smoke is sort of layering down, and we're getting lower and getting lower, and then we're lying on our stomachs and we're coughing and spluttering, and the door swings open and we bail out, and the instructor goes, "That's why you need BA." And we're sort of okay. We're coughing and there's stuff streaming out of our eyes and noses, and some of us felt like a video might have been more appropriate. We would have believed him. So they were the three fires. So, you know, and even there was, it's funny, there was knowledge given to us, which was in a series of books or folders. We had the blue reader. Yeah. You had the white reader, the grey reader, the red reader, and depending on when you joined in the last 100 years, you would have this passed on knowledge. Yeah. And we would work through this book, and it would show you how to use hose, and with a standard branch, how far from 1500 DC if it's a train fire, so it breaks up, and you memorize these things. Yeah. The mathematics we did, certainly for the rank of senior firefighter, which came later, was, you know, effective height, discharge rate. So we had these hydraulic mathematics, although we never used them on the fire ground. Yeah. I remember knowing about the latent heat of vaporization, the specific heat of water. They were something I had to answer in an exam. Yeah. But I didn't know, well, what's so important about the latent heat of vaporization? Yeah. So there was no context to it. I passed it in an exam, which meant I passed in a certain order on my class, which gave me a number. Now, my number is 6670, which I did one better than 6671 in an exam. Yeah. Now, if we both 10 years later did the officer exam and we both passed, I would be still senior to him and get made before he got made an officer. So they'd say in 10 years' time, that's going to be important, so you better study hard. Yeah. That system's gone as well, yeah. You know, where we did huge exams as you went from one rank to another, yeah. which were just huge memory tests. Yeah. And, you know, and then you went on to a death list, and as positions became available. Yeah. So there was seniority. Everyone started at the bottom. You could maybe make station officer around the 15-year mark. Earliest would be 11 or 12 years. An inspector, which I am now, probably around the 20-year mark, although theoretically it could be around 15 years. So you had to do time served plus an examination. And that's still the case to a degree, although everything seems to have been squeezed. So that's what it was. I remember when you went to your first fire, it was your first fire. Yeah. And you were a member of the crew. And I remember a good mate of mine who I went to teachers' college with, he joined 14 years later, and he was telling me about his first fire, and they went to a factory alight. Well, they had multiple cause to smoke issuing, and when they arrived first, he said, it was what looked like smoke coming out of the top. And I said, what happened? And I said, what did you do? And he said, well, the SO went in the station officer went in one direction. He's gathering information. The motor driver went running down the street to ship a standpipe. Yeah. And I said, where was the other guy, the more senior guy? You were the new guy. This is your first night on the job. And he goes, well, he disappeared. He went somewhere. And I said, well, what did you do? And he said, well, I got the high-pressure reel, the 19-millimeter high-pressure reel. Yeah. And I said, what were you going to do with that? And he said, I don't know. I was just doing something. Yeah. And as it turned out, it was condensation out of an air conditioning thing. But it had you know, so, you know, and you just made mistakes. You were told what to do, hopefully by a good mentor, and you did your time. And we had sayings like, your name's not dry in the book until you've done 10 years, because when you joined, you wrote your name in the big book. Yeah. And so you weren't meant to say anything, ask any questions, have an opinion until you'd done your time. You know, so it was very...
Was there any value in that, in the sense that if you had poor training for a whole bunch of reasons, maybe nobody really knew what to train on because nobody could really explain it and so on. There might be a multitude of reasons. Was there a good reason for saying that, well, you shouldn't really have an opinion till you've done 10 years, because what possibly good could you say?
Essentially, yes. I mean, look, to me,
it makes
a reasons. A couple of reasons why it worked. One is we were young anyway, right? So it wasn't a million miles away from being at school and being told what to do by the teacher, essentially, right? Yeah. We have a different person now. Yeah. We have a person that's grown up differently. We have a person who sees authority differently. We have a person who's probably worked for 15 years, and so that's another issue, which means we don't do it the same way as we did do it. But it was really very militaristic. We got yelled at, but everything was step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. Yeah. And the beauty of it was that normally worked.
Yeah.
It was just when it didn't work that you had problems.
Yeah.
And we relied heavily on pattern recognition. We relied heavily on primed recognition,
Yeah.
recognition, primed decision making, which is still incredibly important.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because, I make quick decisions now. And one of the things that's really fascinated me more recently, which I've sort of put into some presentations, is what is really going through my head? Is it all the things I've taught for the last 10 years? Well, I'll tell you what, it's not.
No, it's not.
But it is in one way. So trying to come to grips with that and saying, I'm really worried, and we'll probably talk about this more later, that there's a paralysis from analysis that we never suffered of in the past. And we put fires out, So I used to sort of put shit on this primed recognition decision making as being, well, I get it, but you can then just, if it appears to work but doesn't really, you're going to keep on doing it. So there's sort of some things there, and I said, well, it works well if you can validate each of those experiences accurately. But the more I sort of you go around this circle, the more it's back to the start. I realize how incredibly important that is. I make quick decisions normally, and I don't know if you want to talk more about it later, but
I do want to, but I have one question before. Because it is like you said, I think the circle is. I want to get to the circle because I experienced myself doing the same circle, and not knowing I'm not going to end up in the same place, but sort of. in the ballpark, but it also I think there's a major difference this time I go around. When I talk to people, there's a multitude of reasons why people have ended up in the place they are. I mean, most people I meet in the world, like you, are for one reason or another movers and shakers, and they want to make things happen, and they've been to various degrees possible to make things happen, and they have a strong will to change things, hopefully for the better. At least, but the intent is to be better, and that's before. Intent is important. Like even if I disagree with people, well, it's important. I mean, a lot of people I disagree with, but I actively have to step back and think, well, they're doing it for a good reason. So we're fighting the same fight, even though we have different for instance, the fight.
We've always agreed on everything.
Yeah. Well, it's easy. I mean, like you and me, we probably agree on 95% of what firefighting looks like.
Yep.
But we could get. I think
it's the 5%.
But the 5% is the ones that's interesting. But anyway, but the thing I want to get before that. Is like most people you meet, and they have a different story, and it might be a mentor that brought them into looking at fire service differently as I want to change something, or it might be an incident like you get burned and you're just gonna go like, fuck, this is not working, or it might be there's something here. And for me, I'll let you start. When did you? Maybe it's not a moment, but when did you start really thinking about, hey, I need to fix this. Like, I need to do something about this. This can't be right. Like, I need to.
Yeah.
And why did you even bother?
Yeah. Look, I think by nature I'm fairly competitive.
Yeah.
Not, if I was on the football field, it's game on.
Yeah.
I can switch on and off, but I'm competitive. So I think that anything I do, I mean, I'm a firm believer that the biggest motivator for anyone, or for most people, it's not money, it's to be seen to be good at what you do.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely.
It's a huge motivator.
Absolutely.
I mean, I find it's a very powerful one for me. So if I do something, I like to think I'm doing it really well. Yeah. So, and that sort of gives me.
Can you distinguish that because of pride I mean, the pride of your own
There would
work.
definitely be pride in work.
And because it also the other thing is just winning. Also, I mean, and I'm not saying
Yeah,
that's a bad thing. I mean,
yeah.
just if you go out on the football field, there's
Yeah,
there's no like objectively good about winning that fight.
Let me
It's
put it
just
this way.
the
If I
pure
was- yeah.
subjectively like I want to win,
Yes,
which is a
and
powerful
that was
driving
me.
force.
There's no doubt about it. And there's people that take it far further than I do. And as I've got
Yeah.
older, you start to sort of say, well, you know, that's enough, or you know, I don't really care now. I've done what I need to do, and if that's not good enough,
Yeah.
but
But
if I was a
you redefine the
well, I'm
what
much
does
more
it
stoic.
mean? What does this mean to win?
Yeah,
You
I'm just
redefine that too.
yes, exactly. As you get older, but I'm just more stoic. I
Yeah.
mean, in the sense of, you
Oh,
know,
you want to
I'm
talk
much more,
stoicism?
yes. It's
Marcus
sort of,
Aurelius.
I'm reading works of Marcus Aurelius at the moment, and I'm very impressed because I think that it's such an important concept in
Yeah.
terms of as you get older, you start to sort of realize that there's things you can impact and there's things
Yeah.
you can't, and it's no good getting upset about it. And you
One
know,
person told me I wish I've listened to it earlier, but just a simple version of that. Just stop kicking in doors that are closed. There are plenty of doors that are open.
yeah, yeah.
Just focus on the things that you can change. Not to that one.
Absolutely.
And I understood it, but I
No, when
couldn't.
you're younger,
I could not act on it. I ran on every ball.
and I was the same. And look, if I was the kid running around, if you were doing football training and the coach said, okay, everyone do 2 laps, I've got to be the kid that's at the front,
Yeah.
right? I'm not the kid at the back sort of having a conversation and, I'll just do the 2 laps. And it's sort of like, no, I've got to be the kid that wins this 2 laps or be one of, be up the front anyway. And not that I was a fantastic sports person, but I was probably better than average and I enjoyed my sport. But there was a sort of a thing that just clicked. And, so when I joined the fire service, it wasn't just going to be, I'm just going to be your average firefighter.
Yeah.
I mean, so I took a lot of pride in my work and so on. And, and I did my exams when they came up and I was always going to take certain steps to get to a position where I thought I could be. So that led me to, I did my, back then when you came out of recruit school, you were a 4th class firefighter on probation. So if that went for 6 months, your recruit course, the next 6 months you were 4th class firefighter on probation, which meant that I suppose if you stuffed up, they could come down hard and all that sort of stuff. Nothing ever really happened like that. But then on your anniversary, you would be examined for 3rd class firefighter, then 2nd class firefighter, then 1st class B, then 1st class A. Now, once you reach 1st class A, that was 1 stripe. So that was after 4 years, and you were a 1st class firefighter, which was equivalent of getting a trade certificate. And in fact, prior to me joining the fire service, you would get issued with a trade certificate. You were a firefighter. They stopped doing that sometime before I joined, but you could be a 1st class firefighter. Well, I think it wasn't a piece of paper that held any weight anywhere outside the fire service. I think it was probably
but it was sense of pride of
achievement. It's a sense of achievement, I suppose, that you had got to this stage, because that 1 stripe and 1st class firefighter, you could now be that for the rest of your career. Yeah, that could just be, I'm that guy who's going to be on the back of the pump. And now after another 2 years, you could sit your senior firefighter's examination. Now, it used to be quite extensive. It still is quite extensive, but more in an online and teaching way rather than an examination way. In the past, what we used to do was we'd just examine you. There would just be an exam, a written exam, a practical exam. Everything was just examined. Now we say, no, that time we're going to spend teaching you. There will be assessment, but before it was just that time was examination time. So you just hit the books and so on. So then you would get 2 stripes, senior firefighter. And then after 15 years, you'd get they call it the stripe of shame, the 3rd stripe, which was also a senior firefighter with 15 years experience.
Yeah.
So that was the firefighter ranks. And today it's still basically the same. 1 stripe, 2 stripe, 3 stripes. Once you got your 2nd stripe, you're a senior firefighter for 2 years, you could sit the station officer's exam, which was once again another huge exam. And you were then essentially drawn off a list of those that passed that exam. So after 11 years in the fire service, I did that exam as soon as possible, and I passed that exam, and it took me 2 years before a position was available for me. So after about 15 years in the job, thereabouts, I suppose, I became a station officer. So that was in 1998. So wait a minute, that's 11 years. So 1998, I got made a station officer. And first you do relieving, you go from all stations. I mean, we've got 100 fire stations in the Sydney area, and we've got 350 odd around the whole state. But as a permanent firefighter, you're in the major metropolitan area, and so you're relieving while other station officers are on holidays. So you're experiencing a whole range of things. And then I got my first permanent station after 2 years, and so I had my own shift on C platoon at a certain fire station, and it was a rescue fire station. So when I first joined, everyone did car extrication. Everyone did domestic and industrial rescue and rope work. Every firefighter had a basic training in that. And if there was an accident in Sydney prior to 1991, all 3 services, ambulance, police and fire service, would turn up and just get to work. Whoever had the tools would start breaking the car open, and there was issues, let me say. There was even fights at some stage. It got to the point where the government said enough's enough, and they instituted an act which meant that the fire brigade took the lion's share of rescue work, but certain stations were allocated as rescue stations. They did extra training, had extra trucks, extra equipment. So once, and then you were asked, firefighters, when that first started, we were asked, do you want to be a rescue station? So you applied for it. So the end result of that 20 years later, or whatever, 25 years later, was that we have rescue stations, which tend to be very high-performing stations that have taken on an extra level of education and technical training for that side of the job. That doesn't mean that a normal firefighter at another station won't turn up and start stabilization and do whatever's necessary before they arrive. But so I was always at a rescue station, and so we were sort of keen anyway. Like we never had to tell rescue stations, isn't it about time you cut a car up and kept your skills up? It just happened because of this heightened level of accountability that we felt every time we went to a car accident or anything like that.
So just a quick question before we move on. Do you think that the rescue stations were handed their responsibility because they were already had a culture of, lack of a better word, culture of excellence or culture of continuous improvement? Or do you think it's the other way around, a function of the added responsibility gives you a sense of wanting to achieve excellence?
Look, I think it's both. I think it's both. I mean, I think that we self-selected because when the government looked into it, they had a big review, and they decided that the police were going to have 1 rescue station, the ambulance were going to have another 4, and we were going to have 14, I believe, at the time. And then a circular came out and said, if you would like to be stationed at a rescue station, but you will be examined to meet the qualification of the state, there is no extra pay. So it drew people that wanted to be part of, for want of a better word, that next level of firefighter, if you like. So it drew those guys that said, I want to be that guy, So, it could be the Army guy that said, I want to be a Navy SEAL or an SAS. I just want to do that next thing. That sounds exciting. And so that's how
does that fit into the tall puppy syndrome? The problem with
it does to a degree, but I mean, it sort of self-selects that The guys now get an allowance for it, and they have for some years, but then they didn't. I think there was a sense of we don't really. I don't think the rescue guys really care. Look, there doesn't seem to be any animosity or anything like that, to be totally honest. I think there's just an acceptance that a lot of firefighters try to get to these stations. It's quite competitive now to get to those stations. That's probably the biggest beef, that if you do want to do that side of the work, and some guys don't. I mean, I must admit, after 33 years, if I never go to another car accident again, I'll be a happy person. I mean, I don't find them in any way, you know. So, yeah, I mean, actually, I found after being on the tools for many years as a firefighter, in a rescue sense, I could have quite a distressing scene, I suppose. But you were concentrating on the tools. You had a job to do and could focus. But when I became an officer and I was one step further away, sort of walking around that and looking at it, I found that was harder to handle than being on the tools. I definitely believe that stuff. You get to a point where you go, you know what, I can do without that in my life. There was a technical sense that we were good at what we did. We constantly trained. There was newer cars coming out. We went from no airbags to having airbags and so on, and all of that technology became apparent. And suddenly you're flicking through books to see, if I disconnect the battery now, how long have I got to wait before this thing's energized? I mean,
it became a lot more complicated.
19 different airbags. Where can I cut which pillar? And that was never a concern in the late 80s, early 90s. But you know, so this rescue sort of thing, and it's still, I think we're the only ones in Australia that have it so structured. Where we actually have these stations, and some will have a rescue pump, and some will have a technical rescue, an extra heavy rescue truck, and so on. They'll do rope work, they'll do industrial rescue, they'll do domestic rescue, they'll do, you know, all of that type of thing. And but you know, I find more than anything else, it's very competitive. I've got a lot of young firefighters that I've got 2 rescue stations among my 14 stations, and they want to get to those stations because, you know, they know they're great places to be and to learn. And it's difficult because guys tend not to move out of those stations either. So I think there was that self-selection, but then getting to the other point, absolutely there was a sense of heightened accountability. And I often talk about this. I don't see the same level of technical, the want to have some sort of kudos for your technical ability. When it comes to firefighting, that rescue guys would have among themselves for rescue work. For example, what about Bob? Oh yeah, that guy. He's incredible on the tools. He knows a dozen different ways to do a dash removal or whatever it may be. And there's kudos, and there's pride in that, and there's a sense that I'm respected by my workmates. In Australia, or certainly in my organisation, that never seems to be the same when it comes to fires. It seems, and I think it's down to every fire goes out. They all go out. And it's very easy. Well, no, it's firstly difficult to really drill down and say, well, could this have been a different outcome? It really is difficult because,
absolutely.
You know, but you know, so
at least it becomes very subjective if it could have gone
very subjective. Absolutely. And for those that want to think that way, it's the perfect excuse. This is not my fault. It was just a bad fire. And if you say that to yourself enough, you just believe it. And there's a lot of delusion in that area, and with some firefighters, there's no doubt about that. And they just make that story work. And I've seen guys that can make it work for a fire and delude themselves that what they did was everything they could have done, and they're expert at whatever they were doing. The same guys in a rescue sense, if they went to an accident that afternoon, and the AMBO turns to them and says, look, you know, if we don't get this guy out, he's not going to make it. They will know 10 different ways to do that. The level of accountability has gone through the roof. There's no going defensive on this one. There's no second pump's going to arrive with extra hose lines. This is it. And you know, I have this saying that firefighters rise to a level of mediocrity that avoids further scrutiny. And I think we do that to survive because we have so many things we've got to know. So what you automatically do is you say, well, what is the lowest level at which I need some level of expertise that I will avoid further scrutiny and get the job done. But there's some jobs where that level's just so much higher. And you've got the cops watching, the ambos are watching, everyone's relying on you. There's probably relatives at the side of the car by now, and you're the guy now. And so that level of mediocrity rises to a level of expertise. And this is happening all the time. And what I do like, and maybe, well, I'm an outsider looking into the American fire service, but I tend to get this sense that they respect and there's kudos to be had if you're really good at the basic firefighting tasks. And I really miss that. And I think my own organisation, we just haven't got to that. I mean, look, we have the range of competent firefighters and good firefighters, and everyone's trying their hardest. It's not about trying your hardest, but that sense that I can.
Well, to be fair, no, everyone is not trying their hardest.
I'm probably being charitable. I still think that in the right crew and with the right leadership, they will try their hardest. And I think
they
quite
will
often
try the hardest when there's a fire, but they won't try the hardest between the fires to get good at fires.
Yeah, and look, that's a leadership issue that doesn't help recognise that the hard work is done before you turn up. And that's also disappointing.
When the bells go off, I've never met a firefighter who didn't try to do their best.
Exactly.
That's not where you separate good firefighters from bad firefighters. That's between.
They can still lack capability. And try their hardest, and in fact, to such an extent that they'll put themselves in danger.
But I mean, I want to, because it is interesting. First off, there's many things I would like to unpack that, but let's start with we started with the thing of
what made me think that I needed to do
that was the first one.
That was the original.
But we'll get back to that one too. If I forget about it, remind me. But
that's a good story.
Yes, I want to unpack further the question of, if you give someone or a station or someone more responsibility, you heighten the demands, you increase the pressure, you do all the things that on paper would make it less attractive. Why would I make more for the same money, or why would I make that much more for just a little bit more money? It doesn't. It's not imperative. So on paper it looks like why it would make more sense to go to a station where it's quiet and so on. So you have this, which you get all the thing. Why is it that the fire service in general, I would say, Sweden definitely for sure, is not very good at using that? Meaning, why? So you have a rescue station and you say that, well, by that heightened responsibility, that sense of I am special a little bit.
I think that goes both ways as well, though. I think that goes that I'm special, which I'd probably like to touch on later on. But look, it's interesting. I mean, like I said, we keep on getting people lining up that want to go to rescue stations. So there's always that person. It's interesting too that I'm in a busy zone. I've got 14 fire stations. I have one station that is probably significantly less busy than the others. I probably have 2 or 3 stations that are among the busiest in the state. And I'll always have enough guys that will want to go to that one station that's not so busy. But majority just don't want to go there. They just don't. They want to go, but I have a different demographic. I tend to get recruits out of the college. I tend to get a younger demographic. Very few of my firefighters actually live in the area because it's just the way Sydney is and so on. I don't get some of those problems with firefighters. I think it gets to the point where I've never met a firefighter that didn't say it's the best job in the world. And I didn't get one that wouldn't try their hardest when the bells go off. But then, and this sort of feeds into sick leave and management and human resources, but they do get to a point where they go, you know what, I'd just rather do something else today, and that's go to the football or do this or do that. So there's But where you don't find that is at the high-performing teams. It's the exact opposite.
Yeah.
They have a sense of, if I'm not at work today, I'm missing out.
Yeah.
And I had that sense my whole career. During holidays, I'd be going, after 2 weeks, I'm sort of going, gee, I'm not due back for another 2 weeks, but I'm missing out. The worst thing that could happen is you turn up and they said, we had this job and this job and this job. And you can't share that anymore. You can't have those conversations, that camaraderie that says, and then this happened, and then what about when this happened? And you're sort of sitting there, you know, it was a nightmare. And so as a duty commander, which is, I suppose, battalion chief in a US sense, although our span of control is a lot more, unfortunately, but my job is to try and get that person that had it but's lost it. Yeah. They're in a time of their life perhaps where other things are more important, and sort of, you know, have those conversations. And when you do have those conversations, I find it very effective. So, you know, and once again, I sometimes get a sense we don't hire the right person. I think we try to. Yeah. But I think that, and I don't think we've ever really hired the right person. Like I said, I wouldn't have hired myself.
Well, you turned out pretty good.
Well, that's right. I think you roll the dice enough times, it sort of comes up. But I think maybe I had good mentors. Maybe I had, you know, we have a bit of a culture in our job, and I think it's an Australian thing where we tend not to like authority. We tend to have a go. We tend to, you know,
mock overachievers.
Yeah. So yes, we have this tall poppy syndrome where if anyone just stands out too much, we'll try and knock them down. And you know, so that's
why is that?
I got no idea, to be totally honest. I really don't, because I don't think that's necessarily, once again, as an outsider looking in, I don't see that in the American fire service. I think there's a different culture about success and about what success looks like. And we tend to be more, you know, bringing everyone down to the same level. We feel much more comfortable.
But isn't that if you do well, it reflects poorly on me? Like,
yes,
it is that if everybody is performing badly, I am comparatively okay.
Yes.
So it's if you want social cohesion, if you want camaraderie, if you don't look for excellence or performance, if you want just have a good time at work, mediocrity across the board is very good.
It's most comfortable. It's most comfortable.
Yes. Because again, as soon as someone sticks out, it may be poorly matter, it may also, but most problematic to me is when someone is too good. It creates this dynamic within the group that starts becoming uncomfortable.
Well, what you normally find is that when in Rome, like you're saying, when in Rome. So if you have one of these guys join a high-performing team, that person then becomes high-performing or they leave. So you tend to have stations of like. You know, and then it really comes back to the leadership at that station. And I personally, one of my frustrations during my career is that as an organisation, and I think we're a very good organisation, we do some things very well, but I think that we just think that you'll be a good officer if you've been doing this long enough. And really, I think that most of our time and effort should be spent on because if that person is a high performer, the crew follows. And you know, so that's always sort of frustrated me. But yeah, this is the stuff that fascinates me now. That probably more so than this technique is better than this technique or whatever, because all that is meaningless against a sense of. And we have a saying, you know, that be the firefighter you want to turn up to your house. Now, that's not saying you should do this or this or this. It's just saying what you expect of that person, because someone with this badge on your shoulder is going to turn up to your house if it's ever on fire. And what do you expect? Do you expect some of the, you know, and that way we set a benchmark that each person privately wants the very best. Well, you've got to be the very best because you are that guy for someone else. And these are the conversations I think that aren't being had enough at certain fire stations to really make people think about what it is about this job they're doing. It tends to just go down this technical route I mean,
don't you think because I'll try to tie back to the original question
Yes.
now. I'll try to make that famous loop back and make it look
Yes.
seamlessly. If I look at myself, I was not at all. I'm also competitive. Like, I think that's the trait, competitiveness is very important. I think that's a very important drive factor. And it is, competitiveness is, like you said, tied to pride over what you do. Like, if I'm going to run, I'll try my very best. I don't have a big problem with not winning. I just have a big problem with me not performing.
Sure.
Like when I played hockey, I was a hockey goalie. And my mom used to say that I can lose a game and I came home happy, and I could win a game and I came home sad, because I didn't really care about our team winning or losing. I cared about if I was performing or not.
That's really interesting.
That was winning.
Yeah, absolutely. I see where you're coming from. I mean, I could lose a game of football, but if I felt I did well, I would be happy.
Yeah, I would be very happy. So, and there was someone defined happiness, and I said happiness is knowing that you did what you could in all instances. Like, if you're happy with your marriage, is like, I've done everything I could to make it work, or I was there. If your happiness in how you perform on the soccer field is, I did everything I could. I prepared good. I did everything, and I'm happy with my performance. Like, the other team was better, and I think there's a lot of truth to that. When there's something nagging you in the back of your head, I didn't do as much as I could. I wasn't prepared for this. That's where you get really pissed off on yourself. But now, going into the fire service, I of course, at some point, I was questioning of my nature. Like, I question things, and I push button that seems to be a little bit too sore for pushing. So what's that? But I didn't find, I was mostly interested in technical rescue. And why was I interested in technical rescue, especially extrication? I think it was simply because it was more tangible. I knew I could look without knowing what was wrong, but I could see the difference between a good technical rescue and a bad one. If there was a competition in Sweden, like the extrication competition, I went to visit those, and I could see with my own eyes, not exactly knowing why. I could see a dramatic difference between a good team and a bad team. So what that gave to me was, and why that made me interested in extrication, was I instantly knew that I was bad. Like, I knew I was bad, therefore I'm not performing in the way I should be, therefore I have to train and teach.
So you benchmark against what you were seeing these guys doing. Yeah.
Now, for firefighting, I've read, I wanted to be good at what I did, so I read all the Swedish books. And when I've read them 3 times, and I watched every PowerPoint that was available, I was on top of the game. Like, I knew this. I'm good. Like, I am. Like, why would I try harder when I'm the best? And it wasn't until I started digging deeper and seeing that there's alternative views here, and everything is simplifications. Everything is sort of, you take a lot of information and boil it down into some kind of conclusion. And when I started scraping that surface, and especially when I started like going that deep, I didn't really agree with other people's simplifications and so on. That was the first time in that process where I got to be really interested in firefighting, because I knew I wasn't as good as I thought I was.
Yeah.
And like you said, the level of scrutiny with fires, everyone goes out. I think that's in the heart of it. Every firefighter thinks they're decent, at least decent. It might be that, if you draw a line if you ask firefighters, I usually typically do this when I do training. I asked them to come up and draw a line between 1 and 10. I asked them, so, how good do you want to be? And everyone has to, in front of everyone else, go up and draw, like, I want to be an 8. That's how good a firefighter I want to be. And typically all firefighters go up and they draw a line or a circle between like 6, 7, and 9, 10. Like, very few draw 10 because they sort of know that that's hard, but nobody draws a circle like at 4. So everyone wants to be better than average. So that's the starting line. And then afterwards, I sometimes, depending on the context and training, I asked them to go up and said, okay, so how are you among your peers? And I asked them to do two lines. One is the line, in this room you're at now, how good do you think you are as a firefighter? And how good do you think it, like the broader context of your organization? Now it becomes much more complicated because everyone can't be above average. And they have to face the fact that there is a problem here. And then during the training, one of the key things I always was that now at the center, which is just a couple of years ago, I really started emphasizing is I constantly show what good is. Because I've realized that if I say, are you good? They will say yes. Are you fast at deploying hose? Yes. Everybody firefighter on earth will going to say we're pretty good at this. We mask up fast. We deploy hose fast. We're very good at this. And sometimes, of course, everyone can't be the fastest. Everyone can't be above average. You go like probably half of you are very bad.
Yeah.
and it's not until that was the moment for me when it clicked. I didn't realize I was good. And I think that is in the heart of getting people to accept a culture of excellence.
Yeah.
Realizing I'm not good.
Mine was a little bit different, but the realization was the same, essentially. Yeah. It's interesting you talk about where we view ourselves in terms of what we're capable of against others. I mean, that's subjective to start with. But,
absolutely.
But I call it the spread. We have the spread. And I went to all my crews and we talked about, I said, okay, the large ladder on top of the truck. Yeah. Have you heard me talk about this before? The large ladder on the truck? Maybe not.
Not necessarily. No, it doesn't ring a bell.
So I use this as an example, and I say, give me an example at a fire where things are going to get quite hairy, but you've got to use the large ladder. And you've got to use it quickly and you've got to use it well. And most guys will say, without a doubt, they'll say, I've got a 3-4-story walk up. Someone there on the third level is hanging out the window, smoke's billowing out above their head, and they're waving. And the obvious thing to do is to get that ladder up there and otherwise and help them, right? Yeah. So I say, well, we've got 400 platoons in the Greater Sydney area, right? What do you think the fastest crew would do that in? So to put their breathing apparatus on, put the ladder up, one guy at the bottom, the other guy goes up, swings inside a metre by metre window with, 3 stories up with the gear on, so that coordination and strength to do that, and then can cross that room, close the door, isolate that room, keep that person calm, and the other 6 stations can put the fire out. How long would it take to do that for the fastest crews? And, the average that I get from my guys was, I suppose, 3 minutes, 3.5 minutes. And I go, good. I go, what's the slowest of the 400 platoons? And they go, oh, shit, 10 minutes? Yeah. And I go, well, probably. Everyone says the same thing, somewhere between 3 and 10 minutes. Yeah. So there's a spread. Yeah. There's a spread. And I said, well, actually, I'd add do not complete. As an officer, if I was to send someone up there who I thought had an evens chance of falling, I would have to say no to that tactic, right? So there's a do not complete element even to that, right? For whatever reason, age, weight, lack of capability, whatever it may be. If I recognize that, I'm breaking the law by putting them in an unsafe workplace. So I say, well, right, so that's the spread, and everyone's somewhere on that, right? So what about the young officer I send across town who doesn't know the guys, and they get this fire? How does he know whether they're a 3-minute or they're a 10-minute or somewhere in between? Because unless he or she knows that, how can they set the tactic, which then sets the strategy? So all of this, the task level stuff is critical. We don't set a grand strategy and then say, and here's my tactic, and you guys are going to do it. It comes from the ground up. First, we've got to say there's 20 things we could do here, but guess what? You guys can do 10 of them. So now I'm limited to 3 different tactics, which give me one of the 2 strategies. So everything's done from the ground up. That's why the task level skills are just paramount. But there's a spread on every single task level skill. Now, if the officer doesn't know what the spread is, they're going to get the equation wrong. So, it's interesting how you sort of said, where do people think they are on that spread is another way of looking at what you said,
Yeah.
In a more defined manner. How long does it take to put their breathing apparatus on? So, that's sort of getting into another place. But when you start to have those discussions, people start to think, well, without saying anything, you'll see them sort of stop and they'll sort of look at you and they'll sort of go, ooh, because what they're imagining, where am I on that spread? And every officer in the room's going, do I actually know how long it takes my guys to do some of these task level skills? Because I'm setting the tactics, which enable me to set a strategy. So, but I think that there's this sense that we work from the top down on this, but we don't. Everything's driven by how good are you at that task level. And that's why it's so important. And we've talked about this before. Yeah. We've probably argued about it before. Yeah. But, for me, I'm a young officer. I've got my permanent station. I get back from holidays, and there's a circular there, and it's sort of trips overseas. Who would like a trip overseas? I'm going. And there was 4 different type of categories, and one of them was training. And I just read Paul Grimwood's Fog Attack. Yeah. And now, don't quote me, but it was either written in 1994 or 92, one of the two. And if you've read that book, and I'm sure you definitely know of it, you may have even read it, but it's really just a comparison among brigades all around the world. Yeah. How many ladders per head of population and this and this. But a great deal of the book was about the stuff coming out of Scandinavia, about fire behavior and different techniques and so on. And I'm reading through this book going, and I can't even for the life of me remember how I got the book, where I saw it. It's just lost in time. But I had this book and I was reading it. And as I read it, I'm just sort of going, and I thought I was good. Yeah. I'd been at busy fire stations. I was now an officer. I was at a rescue station. We're doing the business. And I'm reading through the fire behavior side of it, the technique side of it. We use our hose like this. And I'm going, shit, that's completely different to the way we do it. We hold our water. We're afraid of steam and loss of visibility. Yeah. We don't use water till we see the fire. Only a poor firefighter uses water before that. And all these sort of things, which historically had been correct, most definitely. Yeah. Without a doubt, historically, that was the correct way to do things.
We were in building, it works great.
Absolutely. But even in a fire in the 50s, it worked really good too. Yeah. But we were in a substandard uniform with no flash hood. Yeah. We were wearing gardening gloves instead of leather, proper fire gloves. Yeah. So, of course, steam and poor conditions had an impact, had a big impact. But we weren't there in that era anymore. We were past that, right? And we were still doing it the same way, and our fires had incrementally got different. It wasn't what the Blue Reader said anymore, right? So, but I knew none of this then, right? Yeah. It was just, wow, these guys are doing this, and we're not doing any of that. And yet our annual report says we are world's best practice, like every annual report says.
For every fire service in the world.
For every fire service in the world. And so I wrote a report, and it was quite a damning report, to be totally honest, because I was sort of pissed that, I didn't know this stuff, and, I rated myself highly. It really knocked me down. Yeah. And I was now an officer, and I'm sending other guys into burning buildings, right? Yeah. But I'd never worried about it. Ignorance was bliss, right? We were aggressive, we were fast, and we did the job. And sometimes things got a bit hairy, and sometimes things worked well. And I was sending other guys in, and I really didn't have a care in the world at the time. We have an extremely good safety record. For whatever reason, I think a lot of that's discipline, which some fire services lack, and we've talked about that before. And maybe that's that British sort of stiff upper lip type discipline, but we certainly inherited that. And we had a chain of command and a hierarchy, and we did what we were told. And I think there's still a lot to that under the stressful times. And anyway, so I put the report in, and we had a principal instructor assigned to our area, and he's a good friend of mine, and he read the report. And I said, "What do you reckon, Chris?" And he said, "This is great, but we've already done this." And I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Well, we sent a guy 2 years ago to Sweden." Now, he did the course with Jean Raffel in Queensland. And I said, "Oh, well, I can throw that in the bin." And then I thought about it, and I said, "Well, wait a minute, 2 years down the track, I'm at an operational station, and I know nothing of this." Yeah. And what had been occurring was it was just being taught to recruits. So the implementation had failed in a sense. Not through the efforts of the people trying to do it, but if you're just going to teach the recruits and then they go to a fire station and say, this is what we learned, the first thing that's going to happen.
Stand in the corner and put your hat on.
Yeah,
Exactly. Come back when you're done.
So I rewrote the report, and they said, yes, you can go over to Sweden, essentially. So I wrote an email to, and this is in the early days of emails in a sense as well. It's not like we're talking here and so on, but I got contact with Paul Grimwood, and I said, you don't know me, but I read your book, and who's the best guy in Sweden? Who is the guy you would recommend that I ask if I can come over and we can do some stuff? And he said, without hesitation, Nisse Bergström at Sandö. And I still remember him sort of saying, it's not that I agree with everything that Nisse does or says or whatever, but he's the best. And so I spent a week in Sweden. I've never done a fire course. I just spent a week with Nisse, and he told me, I imagine, what he thought was important. Yeah. But it was nearly like, in a martial arts sense, you were going to the sensei, and you were just the grasshopper. And I'll never forget it when he first went into one of those containers and lit a fire. I'd never seen a person, and I haven't since, to be totally honest, who handled a nozzle and just told the fire what to do. But he had this humble, knowledgeable, he was a man of few words. I mean, you know him. But what he said was incredibly important. And if more than anything else, we didn't delve into hard science. It was how to teach. A lot of it was, how do you teach guys in a practical sense? And after that, and I was blown away in a whole range of ways. I mean, they're wearing RB90 turnouts, which you'd been wearing since the mid-'80s. We were wearing something 100 years old, and suddenly there was this uniform where you pulled a hood over and protected the most important part of you as well as the rest of you, and press-to-talk radio, and it's just... My BA went over the flash hood instead of under it, and I'm going to die because all the eggs can't help you away. And it was really funny. My critical thinking skills were not well formed at that time. And I remember we're standing there, we're getting ready to go in. I'm wearing this uniform, I'm feeling $1 million, I'm feeling like Superman in this RB90, and I feel protected, and I've got the little plastic helmet on that looks like I'm a Panzer Grenadier or something.
German Panzer Grenadier.
And I've noticed that Nisse and there might have been some other people there, I can't remember, or the other person setting up or the backup or whatever in case. They've got the flash hood on already. Now, we always had ours pulled down because we put our mask on and pull it over. So you never had the flash hood on until you masked up. And he's got it on. I'm going, at some point he's going to pull that back.
Yeah.
And but when in Rome, I've sort of got mine like that too, and we're sort of talking. He goes, right, okay, let's put our BA on. And he's just gone boom straight over, and I've sort of looked at him. And he sort of looked at me, and I had to ask. I said, "Won't that leak?" And he sort of looked at me, and his words were, "It is positive pressure." But not that it leaked anyway. It wasn't like who cares if I use half of my air out the side of my mask. It didn't leak. And yet I'd been told for my whole career that if you don't wear it against the skin and you don't pull this over, you're going to have problems. I watched guys pull it over and dislodge the mask and wear it with a flash hood across the front. And it worked. And the reason I say my critical thinking skills were not well honed is because I shouldn't have even asked the question. It was a stupid question. Because why would anyone wear it like that if it didn't work? You know what I mean? It was. It's like the clip-on masks in Belgium and the places they wear that. When I take that back to Australia and say, well, we wear a clip-on mask, it's excellent, it's just boom on and off and all that. I mean, you can have a whole discussions about whether you think that's valid or not, but, thousands of firefighters are wearing them to jobs every day, and it works, right? If it didn't, they wouldn't be wearing it. And yet that's the first question you ask yourself. If they're still wearing it, it must work because they're not stupid. They're a modern Western country, And this is what we say. The first thing we say is that can't possibly work. It must get knocked off your head. It must. Why? Because we don't wear it like that. And that's that critical thinking that we talked about before we started recording that I don't think we teach our kids. I don't think we teach it at school, to sort of say, well, wait a minute, take a step back. It obviously works. Whether it's the best thing,
Yeah,
we
no,
can talk.
like you said, there might be variations to that, but
Yes,
I can't disregard it.
no, no,
Like
exactly.
just
So
because it on a bare whim, it doesn't seem right.
that's right, because everyone else has told me
Yeah,
that can't possibly work like that, and with your beard and all that sort of
yeah,
stuff, let alone a flash hood, that seal, you can get a seal,
yeah,
and to some degree that you're happy with, and it may be harder to get that seal, or it may not. I don't know, but I know that if I put a flash hood and put this around, in some cases it works better because it can fit the form of my face. I mean, it
yeah.
works.
And it
And,
doesn't
and
like for me when I didn't have a beard, and if I didn't have,
yeah,
the sweat made it slide around more.
yeah,
When I
yeah,
had the
yeah,
flash hood under, it just stays put.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah,
It like so. Well, that's, I mean, this is a separate issue about the. I almost have to make a video of that because I'm sick of getting the question all the time.
Well, look, the first thing that amazed me was, apart from the
Yeah,
flasher was going under, because we wore it like in the
yeah,
States, in
yeah,
BA style, we pull it over.
yeah,
And we had very poor quality flashers too. But in Belgium, I put my mask over it and I clip it on. I do two very bad things,
yeah,
and I find it works so well. But I just think that there are other ways of doing things, and the discussion isn't that it doesn't work. The discussion might be, and look, the discussion about how we use water is
yeah.
basically one about, you can argue the finer points of efficiency, but the bottom line is getting the job done. And you know,
Like with the clip-ons, I when I was at my fire department, I try to get people interested, and I ordered helmets they could try it, but I wasn't gonna. I would, at least I was at that point, not gonna make. I'm not gonna die on this sword. Like there's plenty of
I said the
swords
same thing. I
to
said the
throw
same thing.
myself. I'm just gonna go like, if you don't, if I get back a list of feedback like this is potentially dangerous and what happens if one goes off, this is something good to go like,
No,
I don't want to take that battle. Go like, okay, there's a million firefighters probably wearing
yeah,
this. Like they go like, it's not an issue. If it were an issue that this, mask popping off everywhere and people dying and breathing smoke,
be using it.
yeah, it wouldn't use it. Like, so
Yeah.
am I gonna, fight for this when
And
in
what?
reality
Yeah,
the reason for them not liking it is mostly because of, one, it doesn't look like it always have looked like the generic,
yeah,
in this case, German style helmet. And two, they feel it's a bit clumpy to put it on because they're not
yeah.
used to it. So they say, well, it's not as smooth. But like, that's
And
because you haven't
it's just a
used
training
it.
issue.
Yeah.
Just a training issue. That's all. Yeah,
And
yeah.
I'm gonna fight it. No, I'm not. But I want to get back to, so
I do the same.
your experience in Sweden was, for you, basically I would describe it as the exact same travel as mine did. It's just you went somewhere
Yep.
in some context, and that was a book and later a trip that made you realize I'm not as good as this as I want to be.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yep.
And that was the one I had. I mean, it's the same trip I had, and that I think that I was, and I when I look back on it, I was almost angry because it ties into the discussion I really want to have
Yeah. Yeah.
about the simplicity and so on. So if you sell something as easy, so if lack of a better word, dumb it down, you make it simple, so they make it practical, easy to teach, easy to do. Now there's a tremendous amount of value in that, and the more I learn about firefighting and teaching, the more I value that. Like you said, prime recognition, decision making, super important. Simple skills to free up cognitive capacity and so on. But the downside, if you teach something very simplistically, and you've taken away a lot of variables because, well, for some reason or other, you deem them not to be valuable enough to take into account. Like sure, you can increase efficiency, but is it that better? Now the problem with that is, of course, you might lose efficiency in some instance. But the other one, it was the thing I noticed, that if I think that that's the answer, if it's taught to me as, if you use your nozzle in this way, or if you raise the ladder this way, that's the best way, and a period. And I go from and I do that, and I practice that, and I get good at that. If I then leave the training and I think I'm the cat's meow, like I'm the best in this, I'm really good. If you don't realize that if you perform this skill well, you are at most average, because what you just learned was a true simplification. And if you want to be an expert, if you want to be really good, here's the rabbit hole. Like that's where you have to go. And I was never, I perceive myself never being shown the rabbit hole.
I think that you come from a different space, in the sense that if I go back to how did we fight fires before I went to Sweden? Yeah. Well, we fought fires essentially, if the fire was far away, I put it on a straight stream.
Yeah.
If the fire was closer, I'd put it on a spray.
Yeah.
Because I'd just get more of the fire in my spray.
Which makes a lot of sense from that perspective.
Oh, absolutely. Because nozzle technique, or there wasn't a technique assigned to it. There wasn't anything. You just pointed. It was like pointing a torch at something. You just pointed something at it, and you fired for effect. And if you put enough of it downstream, things went out eventually, or they didn't go out, and you went defensive, and they went out a bit later on. So I had nothing, but in a sense, and correct me if I'm wrong, you were raised in a culture that said the rest of the world thinks what we're doing is pretty good, and there's validation, and we're teaching you that great stuff. And so you sort of came in to the place that I was aspiring to, Nelly. You see where I'm going with this?
Well, and yes, I see where you're going. And I think that was the second step I took. The first step, nobody talked about anything. You're just taught, this is how you do it. Okay, and then you don't question it, because why would you question it? You know nothing to be able to even question it. The second problem I got was, Sweden is the best of the best, so read the Swedish books, because that's all you need to know. So that was the second problem I had, meaning I've read all the Swedish books. Now I am truly the master of the universe.
But in a sense, those books were validating what you...
Oh, absolutely. Taught. Yeah.
For me, those books were the exact opposite to what I got taught, because I really didn't get taught much at all. Yeah. So that we were coming from a different place.
Well, I mean, for me, that book was also Paul Greenwood's fun, because this was the Firefighter.
Yeah.
Because the Firefighter was the first book I read that was in Swedish.
Really? Okay.
So that was when I started getting, like, there's different perspectives on everything I've been taught.
Yeah.
So I mean, I had the same. It was, I mean, so I think that it just came. That was my, if you call it, step 3. What side of Sweden? Now I'm going from, hey, I think I'm the best in the world, to, damn it, I'm in Croatia. There's guys saying different things in a different way, from a different perspective, from a different angle, and go like, I've never thought about it from that angle. Does it make sense? Yes or no?
Who were those guys?
Yeah, I don't know. 2 crazy Australian guys that made me tag along.
But this is really interesting, because essentially we were regurgitating, in a sense, what we had learned in Sweden.
Yeah, but you did it in a different perspective.
But we had come from a different place.
You put it in a different context.
And put it in a different context, which is really interesting.
To me it was. I mean, I wasn't. When you talked about, droplet sizes and, different cone angles, that wasn't for me anything new.
No.
Basically everything in that course about the science bits were nothing new. And when I said in container, that was nothing new. But the framing and how the framing was different. Like, oh, we came from this, and that's why we do this, and you also question some of the things that we did in Sweden, like searching, like fire attack wasn't the norm. We in Sweden we relied heavily, and still do, sadly, that searching is still sometimes done before fire attack if there's only one crew and so on.
That's really interesting, because when we were uneducated in the fire science,
yeah,
and what the fire science told us was that we're on a time limit now, and things are just getting worse unless we put water on the fire. That's what we took away from it, and so we flipped. Because when I joined, first crew in, I won't say first line in, because quite often that was without a hose, would search, because that's what we'd always done. Because previously, however many years back, we did have more time, right? And so what we took away from it is we have to change our tactics, because the fire science is telling us, and yet you yourselves didn't necessarily make that jump.
No, I would say, I think it was still the disconnect between.
Or was that just being Vikings?
Yeah. Well, no, we got balls big enough to ignore the fire. No, there's multiple answers depending on how you view the world and so on. But one answer is that we were still not very good, and I think we've gone even worse, and I think we're getting better again. But connecting the science pieces to what are you actually supposed to do. Like if I know that oxygen is bad to the fire, but I'm not closing a door if there's a rocking fire, there's a disconnect between what I understand about fire and what I'm supposed to do. And I think that was part of the piece. Like if someone told you the fire's getting worse, there's smoke everywhere and it's very poisonous smoke, therefore you need to find people faster. You need to get better at search. I mean, that makes perfect sense. Unless you take it in maybe a broader account. What happens if the fire does what the fire does and there's a safety problem? Or what happens if this fire does what the fire does and produce toxic gases and they die anyway? Is there an option to go to the fire first and just put that out so you can start ventilation? But like, yeah, maybe that's true too, but who are you to say? So there's
that's where we ended up. We ended up there quickly.
Yeah, and I think that I know that I asked you about the origin of the wheat field or cornfield, analogy about search versus fire attack, and you gave me some Belgian fire officer, and Carol doesn't know it either. So there's still an unknown hero out in the world about the cornfield analogy. But anyway, it's fantastic. But when you told that to the class, that was the first time.
Maybe you should say what you should for those that haven't heard it.
Oh yeah, well I'll let you, because you were the one who told it from me, so I'll let you run the short version.
Yeah, well, I mean, I definitely heard it from Carol, but he must have heard it from somewhere else. But it was essentially, if you've been in Belgium, you they have these fields in the city, basically, in some places, but corn or whatever. But imagine that you're having a picnic, and next to one of these fields, and the kids are playing ball and so on, and you're having a picnic, you're having a fantastic time, and suddenly you look around, the kids are gone, but you can hear them playing. They're actually playing in among the wheat or the corn or whatever, but you can't see them. They're in among the crop, and they're running around and playing hide and seek or whatever. And then you hear the combine harvester start up, and then the farmer starts to harvest the field, and you're looking, and you run into the field trying to find the children, or perhaps you could go and just tell him to turn the harvester off, So you can head into a situation where you don't know the layout, you can't see, and all of these things are against you, or you can just go to the cause and try and stop it. And that analogy made an enormous amount of sense for our crews, and I imagine for the guys in Belgium as well.
It made a lot of sense to me too, because it highlights we have equalized, or damn it, English word. I will just say equalized because you're gonna make sense. We have connected search and rescue.
Yeah.
Like, so if you search, you rescue. If you do fire attack, you do fire suppression. And because rescue is more important than fire attack, we should go search. So there was this connection between rescue as an objective and search as a task. They were linked.
Yes.
They were linked 50 years ago because it was true. You didn't have to really care about the fire because the fire didn't grow that fast. It didn't produce that much toxic gases. You had time and so on. So there was an integral link between searching and rescue. And that morphed into that, again, search was synonymous with rescue. And that's where if you say, I want you to put water on the fire, unless it was clear enough in your head so that you can explain it clear enough to anyone else, it's perceived as, oh, you don't think we should rescue people? Go fuck yourself.
Exactly. And I mean, it took analogies like we just talked about when we had those conversations with crews. And it's really funny. Look, I know when I went into fires before a line did to do search and rescue, as we were taught back in the day, it didn't worry me. Ignorance was bliss.
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
I was doing what was necessary, and someone else would get a hose. There was always this thing in the back of my mind that said, someone else will take care of that.
Yeah.
I don't know who that was going to be.
Yeah.
It wasn't me. So
it's not an immediate problem anyway. So
no, there was these set expectations and so on. But as we started having these conversations when I returned back from Sweden, and my role essentially was to fundamentally change these elements. That became my role for the next decade was, how do we have that discussion? Now, I remember saying we would have this discussion. I remember I got some blowback, but it was normally after the fact. One of the officers which I'd been training sort of went back to one of our main stations, and the inspector there said, well, you can hold drill tonight. You can run the training tonight. And he said, oh, great. So we'll fill this area with disco smoke, and we'll put a few mannequins in there. They can be the rescue, and we'll put a bright torch there. That's the fire. And then we'll practice our host skills and our radio communications and all that. So the first crew goes in, right? And but on the way to the fire, they come across a victim. And so they get on the radio and say, we found a victim, and this is quite a few years ago, and this wouldn't happen now. But and the officer sort of said, well, continue your fire attack, and fire is the most important thing. This was what he took away from the lesson. And so they go and do that, and then some other crew gets the body and that sort of stuff, and off they go. And then they're having a debrief, and the inspector comes back in the room, and he says, okay, so how'd we go? What did the first crew do? And they said, well, we were fire attack, and we went in. And but we came across a victim, so we radioed back, and the SO said, ignore that victim, you're fire attack. And the inspector's gone, what the,
what the
who said to do that? Who said to do that? Are you insane? You found the needle in a haystack and you ignored it, and rightfully so. And the guy turns around and says, well, that was John McDonough told me to do that. And John McDonough did not tell you to do that. But you can see how we were, everyone was struggling. Well, how do we make sense of this? So we introduced two rules of thumb, which was the precursors to my notorious non-negotiables. But, which is I have no amount of fun with. But, and the first one was...
I was happy with rules of thumbs. Not you could have stopped with rules of thumb.
The rules of thumb were my first sort of dipping my toe into this. This is really what I wanted to do. And it was with no visible victims or better information, first line in should be fire attack. So just that simple way of saying, because if there's visible victims, grab them. If there's better information, they're in the front room, grab them. And then we had fire attack crew never ignores a victim, and search and rescue crew never ignores a fire. Now, between those two rules of thumb, it encompasses everything. But until we had a way of simply putting that in context, as you said, we struggled, and we had these misunderstandings, and people saying, what are they teaching them? And, this guy needs to stop. And because we couldn't articulate it well enough, that guys that for so many years in their career, we were asking them to do something different.
But would it be fair to say that the reason for those misconceptions is because you did not understand it well enough yourself? Like, how do I in
a sense, we were not good enough at teaching it.
Because I find that, the famous Einstein quote, if you don't understand it, you can't If you don't understand it well enough, you can't teach it.
Yeah.
Like, and I find that when you talk songs like that, when you make one of the most difficult things you can do is simplify something.
Yes, that's our job.
It's incredibly hard.
Yeah.
So when you simplify something, you try something, and you start see that, like you experienced, it start having failures. It's like, that was not my intent.
Yes.
Like, that was not my intent when I did it, because I didn't understand.
I try and come up with things I can't break. So that, with no visible victims and no better information, first line in should be fire attack. Try and break it, and you can't, right? Fire attack crew never ignores a victim. Search and rescue crew never ignores a fire. Now, that falls into a little bit of a problem if your search and rescue crews don't have a hose line, and that's a whole other discussion.
And you can make up, I would say, a rule of thumb, because I have no problem saying that. I think it's a good rule, even the word never.
But it's hard to break.
But it's hard to break. But if you move into an area where you have 70 kids unconscious in a hallway, and there's a fire over there, you go like, well, just put the fire out, because you can't drag out 70 kids. Yeah. So you find but that's the thing. And I think
the problem is, as educators, if we sort of say, this is what you should do most of the time, but I think but suddenly loses all of its power to be able to be drawn upon quickly and used as a rule of thumb. And it's interesting. I mean, that I had this thing called the what if. I called it the what if game.
Yeah.
And when I was teaching early on, and not very good at it, I mean, the easiest thing is to teach the science. The science is black and white. The hardest thing is then taking that and saying, well, how should we now act now that we know this? That's the hardest thing. You know it, I know it. And saying it in context and simply, without making it too simple. And so it was sort of this sort of, I've lost my train of thought now, but
about simplifying enough but not too much, or it was about actual search and rescue and never go a victim?
Well, when we weren't very good at what we were saying early on and trying to help guys out in this regard. It'll come back to me anyway, but this has always been the struggle for me, and what interests me most is, can I come up with some rules of thumb, some actions that, in a really complex situation, lots of variables, that still hold true for
that is
for all cases generally. And
I try to find it like this: if you, how I would define a rule of thumb, if nobody thinks, is it still safe? If that criteria is passed, like if people just lose their mind and do exactly as this rule of thumb, will they kill themselves? Okay, no. Okay, that's good. Then second stage would be, is the rule of thumb efficient enough for most of the fire?
Yeah.
Like it could, I mean, if they're safe and they're reasonably efficient at most fires, that's a good rule of thumb.
Yeah.
Like, could you optimize that? Absolutely. But you need to pass the first step of it being safe.
Well, it comes back to training. It comes back to how much time you've got, how much money. But I know what I was talking about. I mean, this what if game. Yeah. So I'd be in front of a class and fairly inexperienced at this, and not full of beans, I've got to get this information out. And when I came back from Sweden, it was nearly like a crusade. That if I didn't tell enough people about this quickly enough, we were going to lose firefighters. Yeah. We must, because how can we continue to do our job like we have for the last 100 years with these dangers and the big three, flashover, backdraft, fire, gas ignition, and continue not to lose guys? I came back and I would read the newspaper every day. Where's the dead guys, right? Yeah. And it essentially it wasn't happening. But we were just going, we're playing catch up, let's keep on going. But you get in the classroom and you'd have guys and we'd be saying, you've got to cool those gases or whatever it was, right? Yeah. Now they've just come, now I imagine myself sitting in that class, I would have said, this is really good. We're finally getting some good training and this is interesting. I never got told that and I never got told this. And now cooling the gases, it makes perfect sense. Yeah. And then we went in a container and we saw certain things. And so what am I trying to do? Pattern recognition again. Yeah. Now, I'm unlikely to see a range of those things I saw in the container at my next fire. Yeah. So I'm probably not going to do it at my next fire. So already there was starting, we had this breakdown. Yeah. But, you get guys that were just against change and they would sit there and they'd go, a hand would go up. And these guys are pros. These guys are good at what they do. And they'd go, so that gas cooling, do we have to do that all the time? Yeah. And you'd go, well, no, not, well, sort of. If the gases are da-da-da-da, and off you'd go again, you know, and all this stuff, all this knowledge I just acquired would come out. And go, okay, you sit down. And then they go, well, hand would go up 5 minutes later. Well, what if? And they'd describe a situation. Yeah. Yeah. And you go, well, in that situation, yes, I'd probably still do it because of this, and this knowledge would come out again. 5 minutes later, the hand would go up again. They go, what if? And this would happen. What if? What if? And they'd keep on describing a situation till you'd suddenly say, well, as you've described it, no, you probably wouldn't have to do it then. Yeah. And they'd go,
yeah.
Gotcha.
But that's their But that's their get out of jail free card, right? Now I haven't been wrong before.
Well, what I learned was the first thing when someone asks a question, and you do this in a split second, are you sincere? Are they sincere? Yeah. Is this them playing the what if game to suddenly get to a point where they're going to say, I told you, you're wrong, or whatever it may be? Or are they sincere? And if they're sincere, I'd spend 4 hours talking to them. If they're not sincere, cut it off. Yeah. But, you know, so these are these battles we sort of had. But, you know, generally speaking, you talked about anger before. Most of our firefighters were just pissed off that they didn't know this stuff or that no one had thought it was important enough to teach them. And we had a whole fire service that didn't have a language. And I used to, and this gets into this, what is good enough and how difficult are some things over other things. And I would always come back to, as soon as I developed a program, there was, do we need to teach them all this science? And I'd go, well, yeah, it's necessary. But, you know, and I'd say, look, what about the 15-year-old kid that leaves school at 15 and becomes an apprentice electrician? In Australia, that person would work with would have a boss, and they would be the apprentice, and they would do all the shitty things, but they'd be learning stuff, and he'd let him do some of the stuff. But one day a week, they'd go to technical school. And I'd say to guys, I could always say to a group of firefighters, who's an electrician here? And invariably a hand would go up. We had a lot of tradespeople. And, you know, and I'd say, well, how old were you? And they'd say 15. And we'd go through this process. And I'd say, well, what did you learn at TAFE? And they'd go, so I said, you were 15. Why didn't you go on? Why didn't you do the final 2 years of school? I wasn't smart enough. I was never smart enough to go to university. Okay, so you're the 15-year-old who's not smart enough to go to university. What did they teach you at TAFE? Well, they taught me about volts and amps and electricity. And so, in effect, you learned a language of being an electrician. So you could talk to another electrician about volts and amps and capacitors and resistors. And he said, yeah. And I said, well, who in this room has a language for firefighting? Who can tell me about energy? What's your language for energy? For us, it was big fire, small fire. Yeah. We were never taught what a joule was or a megawatt or heat release rate versus heat flux. We weren't taught a language to have an honest discussion among ourselves in our industry. And all we did was say we need to have our language. And even now we struggle with that language because we've been training our recruits and our firefighters for the last 10 years. But what about my rank that missed that, right? I mean, if I say a megawatt, I might as well be saying, you see, because we haven't thought that it's necessary. So all we've been doing is teaching our guys a language that's just as simple as we taught a 15-year-old that was too stupid to go to university, the language of being an electrician, or the water hydraulics for a plumber, or the motor mechanic who had to know about it, you know, and yet this dumbing down, I get this, they're just fireys, they're just firefighters, John. Do they really need to know all of this? Yeah. And you know, look, I get it, but we were choosing 100 people out of 7,000 every year. We were taking the best, and yet this wasn't necessary. But I've got to admit, I still bring that back to that's the mental aspect of it. Yeah. But the task level of it, of whether just opening and pointing it or making another change here or saying I want a different flow rate because that gives me a different droplet, I don't see any different to saying, you know, why do we need to teach them this language? Why do we need to teach them that these physical actions are also important to be as good as you can? And you know, and I think that's sort of where everyone, all of our peers are at the moment. Well, how do we get the best bang for buck out of this guy? And we have different experiences in that. And I've never, maybe it's a personal thing, I've never found it difficult. I think that I've never had recruits that found it difficult. Having said that, I've never had a recruit come back to recruit school as a member of an operational crew as good as when they left. So there was those skills perished, and they perished solely because they didn't practice them or feel they needed to practice them. That gets back to our problem about what they think is necessary to be good at the job. And, you know, yet if they were at a rescue station, those skills of the oil hydraulics necessary, they know every braking strain, every cutting strain, you know, because they see that as necessary to reach that minimum level of expectation so that they don't stuff up at the job. And so I think that, to me, it's really a battle not against which technique is good or bad. It's a battle of how do I get the guys to accept that that is crucial, that they're fundamentally able to do those task level skills, which I think, and like I said, we talked about it earlier, they're just not what they should be.
So see if an example of, and see if this, what your thoughts are. So you talked about ladder before. So we were doing training in our region, and we identified that people are not as good as with the ladders as they should be.
Because we rarely use them.
No, rarely use them, and for some, you know, people don't at least perceive them to be important and so on. But we are supposed to provide an exterior escape route. It says in the law. It's but the few things that actually specified in the law that we should really be able to do, because, you know, if you're in an apartment fire, if you live in an apartment on like third floor, your only means of escape is a staircase. There's not a second staircase, and the other means of escape is the ladders from the fire department. So it's the build code is basically surrounded by the ability of the fire service to provide external evacuation. So anyway, so we identified that this is a problem. So we made a drill where they should be able to use the ladder, and our region was about 700 firefighters. So it's not as your region, which is monstrous, but it's well enough to get like sort of a sense that how is this going? Like you get a fair bit of numbers and see how does this look like, and all the instructors are saying like this is not good, like this does not look good. So we write like a summary report to the different fire chiefs in the region that we train on, and said, well, generally you need to train on ladders because this doesn't look good. Next year we thought, well let's bring everyone back and see if they approve. Like, and it's the same result, like it looks bad, and we write another report saying it still looks like crap. Like we got to fix this, and come back next year, same result. And you kind of go like, so why don't the people care? Why don't the fire chiefs care? Nobody seems to care that we're not good. We're not good at this because we had performance criteria.
Yep.
So it wasn't unclear how fast you were supposed to raise that ladder. So we put we videotaped everything. So we put cameras on the training. But because we couldn't like do a lot with it, we just sent the video to each crew. So each crew got their video of their attempts. So like, look at this. Do you think it's good enough? We don't think it's basically good enough. Try to improve. Next year, no, nothing happened. Like nothing. So you kind of got like how are we supposed to make any change? Like what we say obviously has no impact.
Yeah. Well, to me, that's the compliance issue, though, essentially.
Yeah, it is. It is a compliance. Well, our fire chief did not want to enforce that. They did not want to take that, and that was part of the problem. So year afterwards, we tried again, and the thing we did, two differences. One, we shoot all the videos again and send it out to the crews because we were not allowed to send it to like so that everyone can watch everything.
Yes.
Because then somebody might get sad. But we
I know.
Yeah, but we were able to put all the times for all the crews in a spreadsheet, and we send it to the fire chiefs. So now there was a long list,
so
all the times they had. So the performance criteria was 1 minute 30 seconds from with the handbrake on. 1 minute 30 seconds. The ladder should be fully extended. The support streams get up, and there should be a firefighter starting to climb the ladder. That's 1 minute 30 seconds. And basically nothing happened, and we were like, "What the?" So the last year we did two changes, and I don't know which of these changes to made the big effect, but that's where something started to happen. The first one was that we color coded everything in the spreadsheet and made a graph so that you could easily compare different services and stations to the fire chiefs. So now they could, just by a glance, they could look at, why is my fire service much worse than the fire service next to them? So they got easy comparison and saying that, why is my graph all red and why is this all green? Like a child, but anyway. And then the second thing we did was we took videos and we selected the good videos and we replaced that over time and showed the good ladder races to the crews. So for instance, there was a full-time staff coming there doing the race a ladder, and afterwards they put it down and the instructor goes up and said, well, do you think that was good? Well, and then we go like, yeah, we think it was good, it's fairly fast. Like, well, the time was 2:15 and the performance criteria is 1:30. Do you think that you could be faster? Well, you can't really be faster, because if you're faster, it's going to be unstable. It's going to be dangerous. It's going to lose the ladder. It's much better to do it like simply and like calmly, and you'll get there in the end. So, and basically if the fire instructor didn't have anything more, he couldn't say much more, because they've already decided that their performance was good enough, and the subjective opinion of the fire instructor doesn't matter. But then he took up the iPad and he showed not even the retained firefighters. It's a volunteer service, it's not even a retained, which is very few in Sweden. And he showed them, and they did it on like 55 seconds or something. And he showed them the video of them doing it, put the handbrake on, and it was just perfect. It was just nice to pop, 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 pop. Nothing unsafe, nothing wobbly, anything when they raised the ladder. It was just nice. And he said, okay, so this is the volunteer station outside. What do you think now of your performance? And that's what the first thing that crew commander said, like, well, now you pulled the pants down. He didn't say that, of course, but like okay, maybe it is possible to do it faster. You obviously that, and you benched right on the spot. You took away their defensive system, and you made them realize that I'm not on the level that I have to be. And when we did those two things. So when we did that to the fire chiefs, now the next year afterwards, there was a massive difference in how good the crews performed in ladder racing.
Yeah. Well, essentially, they had risen to a level of mediocrity that had avoided further scrutiny in the past.
That's exactly what you said.
You just applied more scrutiny.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, and this is what we all do.
Yeah.
And I call it a defense mechanism, because as firefighters, we have so many tasks to do. We're the jack of all trades, and we run the risk of being master of none.
Yeah.
And so everyone's just prioritizing, and my fear is that we'll prioritize fires out of it. We'll just do the maths, and we often get that maths wrong in terms of, well, we're not going to as many fires as we went before, so let's try and once again, we need to have a certain level of expertise there, but other things are more important. In fact, whether that's prevention, whether it's this or whatever. And it's interesting, because I've noticed it in my organisation, but I get an email every day which shows the calls that were attended in my state, which is essentially the whole fire service.
Yeah.
And, it could be argued that if you divide them all up among the different things, whether it's rescue, fires, wires down, bushfires versus structure fires, medical assist, whatever it may be, hazmats, you start to see that, probably only 30% of our calls are fire related. So if you look at the stats from that point of view, you could argue that 70% of our time is spent doing something else. So maybe 70% of our training should be something else. Now, this is really simplistic, but this is how people start to think about it. But if you look at it, the stats from another point of view, you can also say that of the fires, you have, if you look at them as separate, you have four times more chance of going to a fire than any other of the other things on their own. So it's still our most important thing. So once again, there's statistics, there's a growing risk aversion in the industry, which
I would add another one, which I think is very important to that list you have. I would say most of the other things the fire service goes to is something that really could be done by other people. Like if you go to a power line down, that could be a job for a power line company to do that. If you go to a medical call, that should really be the hospitals doing that. We're just helping them out because we're closer. And you make that list, go to technical rescue. I mean, a climber would be better. If you go to diving, a diver would be better. Like the only thing the fire service has going for it for a lot of calls is that we're available. And that's of course an important factor, but it's
our curse as well.
It's a curse as well.
The jack of all trades.
But because fire is still the only thing that nobody else could do is fire.
And but we also have this weird sort of, like I said, if you join my fire department, you're going to be up against 100 other people and 7,000 other people for 100 jobs. But if you move a couple of hours out of the major, I mean, Australia's a big country, but we're the most urbanized country in the world. We live along the eastern seaboard mostly and the western seaboard, and that's it, essentially. So, we have big cities. I mean, Sydney has 5 million people. But if you move out into the regional areas, we're struggling to get firefighters. So now anyone can join. Now, once again, I'm not casting any aspersions here. I'm saying that's what we've got. It changes instantly from, so, and for a whole lot of logistical reasons, we struggle to provide the same consistency of training to those people in those regional areas. They can be a 10-hour drive away. They've got to be flown to training. So we have these logistical issues, which makes it really tough for those firefighters. But, this sort of, anyone can do this. I mean, the problem is that when we first rolled the program out, it was, well, do we really need to teach this to all firefighters? And I said, what do you mean? And they said, well, some of our firefighters in some of our outback towns might only go to one fire a year. And I said, well, they need it more than anyone else because that one fire still demands the same level of expertise as the crew that's going to, or the same level of capability, if you expect them to do offensive fire attack, as the crew in the city, which is much better supported and has more experience going into these fires. So we have this weird sort of elephant in the room between volunteer brigades, busy city brigades, about what level of expertise do they need. It's not an even playing field. And,
I think it's very hard for
distinguish
fire chiefs too, because we are since firefighting and performance at fires is so hard to measure. I mean,
yes,
it's to compare one performance against another is you would have to have very lot of knowledge and a lot of factors available to you. Like
you would have to have an enormous amount of data points, and we just have.
So it's almost impossible, which means that our fire chiefs who's looking at data, I can pretty much, it seems like if I were a fire chief, it seems like I can lower training and lower training and lower training, and nothing bad really seems to happen. Like, like you said, firefighters are not getting killed to any large extent. Injuries due to fires is not that very bad. I mean, it could be better, but it's not that very bad. And you kind of go like, so what's your argument in getting better? Because I'm not getting any more negative pushback if we get worse at fighting fires, but I'm sure getting negative pushback if we're creating more smoke from a training field or if we're putting a lot of money into training.
Yeah. And look, I mean, if you try your hardest at a fire and the house burns down,
Yeah.
the people will still thank you.
Yeah.
I mean, it's this weird situation. If
I
it
was at a
doesn't,
fire yesterday, which was I'm a part-time firefighter, retained firefighter, and well, safe to say it was not the best incident that has ever been performed. I can't say much more than that, but when the owners of the house that burnt down, or the relatives of that person who was and they came up and thanked me, I couldn't look them in the eye.
Mm, mm. But you see, if it doesn't burn down and we keep it to the room of origin,
Yeah.
we also get thanked.
Yeah, we
The
get thanked
assumption
anyway.
is that even if we could compare them directly in two alternate universes,
Yeah.
that we're not held accountable for that, because one was just a worse fire than the other. That's what it was. And this is the problem in itself in terms of how we assess our own capability at these things. And that's why I've just gone straight. I don't, it's not about testing people for, do they know it's 0.3 of a millimeter, or do they know this or that? It's, are you the guy you want to turn up to your house if it's on fire? Now, if you're happy with substandard lack of capability, you know, this is going to be a difficult conversation. But if you realize that, because everyone wants that person to be superhuman, everyone wants that person, well, you are that person for someone else. So that's our benchmark. That's what we've established. Just be the person that you want to turn up to your own house. And there's no wriggle room there. There's no but or what, I don't know, or do I really need to? You know, so we use that as the basis. And then I stopped talking about being safe. I don't talk about safe. Because to me, when I came back from Sweden, everything was about safety. The whole program was sold on, we need to be safer, because if we're not safer, we're going to have problems. Now it's, you can try and be as safe as possible, but if you're not capable and good at what you do, you will be unsafe. Yeah. But if you're really good at what you do, you will be safe. So the best way to be safe is just to be good. So when I talk to firefighters, I'll say, you know, I'll say we want to be good at what we do, and we want to be safe. So it's safety second, because that comes as a result of being good at what you do. And that's been a fundamental change.
Firefighters didn't join the service to be safe. Of course, everyone wants to go home.
Here's the problem. I honestly believe that that we may be at, you know, one of the problems is, I think that the entrance examination has an area about safety and risk. Yeah. And if you want to get top marks on that, you answer it as if everything you are absolutely safe and you will not accept any risk. And I really hope that some of our new firefighters are telling fibs when it comes to that.
Oh, they are.
Because if you're that type of person, this organization is going to be a nightmare for you, because you have to be that. We want the person that will take calculated risk based on their level of capability and what's in front of them. And but if you're not that type of person, you're a mental case waiting to occur, because every job you go to is going to be, you're going to be stressed and anxious and should I, shouldn't I? Or, I mean, we want a person that looks at something and says, you know what, I can do this. And you know,
but I think haven't we put ourselves in that position where safety became a selling point?
Absolutely. The whole compartment fire behavior training, and I sold it on safety.
Oh yeah, I mean, I would say 99% is selling it on safety.
Yes.
When they launch a program.
Yeah.
They're not launching it from a performance perspective.
But now, like I said, I mean, part of that journey, if you like, was to say that we should be as safe as possible. But if we're good at what we do, we're safe. It's the byproduct of being good at what you do. Is you're safe.
But it was when the Cobra launched, it was not by the manufacturer. They didn't know much back then, I don't think. But from the authorities, it was sold as a safety equipment. And firefighters hated it.
Yeah.
Because they didn't want to be safe. That was not. They didn't join the fire service to be safe. I mean, they didn't put it like that. They had a host of reasons why they didn't look the Cobra more okay than not than others. Yeah. But the main is that they didn't want to stand outside to spray water if they didn't feel that they were being more productive, being more effective, being more professional. Yeah. If they thought, we will replace our professional badass hero dragon slayers that goes inside with this safety jock standing outside spraying water with a high pressure system. Yeah. That trade-off was not, they were not willing to make that trade.
But there's a whole lot of things that ride off that as well. I mean, what is the public's expectation? Yeah. You ask anyone in the public, their expectation is you guys are going to come and help me out and save me if necessary. Now, that may not be the right expectation, but it certainly is. So I think we have an expectation there. I think we can do our job safely in that regard, but it all depends on how good you are. I think without a doubt.
But that's the question, right? But it's not a question if it can be done safely. It's just a question of how.
Yes. And I mean, that comes back to capability. Yeah. I mean, if you've got a gap, and you've got to jump across a ravine or something like that, and if you fall, you're dead. It's 100 feet down, but the gap's only 5 feet across. Now, most people can jump that. It's just a capability problem. Yeah. If you can jump 5 feet, it's not unsafe. But if you can't jump 5 feet, or you only jump 5 feet 50% of the time, we've got a problem. Yeah. And I say to my station officers, I don't care if your crews suck. You just have to know they suck. Yeah. Because if you think they're better than what they are, you'll put them in danger and you'll break the law because they have a right to a safe workplace. Yeah. And I say to my guys, if you don't want to do some of this stuff that we think is necessary, now that might be stay low, it might be cool the gases, it might be control the air, it might put water on the fire as soon as possible. If you don't want to do that, I'm fine with that. You stand over there. Yeah. We'll get someone that's good at doing that and we'll go in and we'll help the public and we'll do our job. And if we can do that, we will be safe doing that. So everything just comes down to it's a capability issue. And if you understand the capability very well, you'll be safe. Because
I need to go, for instance. So I'll ask a final question because I really have to go. I need to pick up the kid from kindergarten. But two times, because because we talked about this, if we're going to Swedish, if I make a generalization, if we're going to a water rescue, there's no problem for the station officer to turn around and say, "Hey, Lisa and Lars, you're the best swimmers we have. You put on the swimming gear and do this rescue. Yeah. You up the team. You take the best options, and nobody has a problem with that. Nobody's gets sad because really nobody cares about the performance at swimming. Like the only thing that it's just some people that think, and you could say for hazmat, it's almost a penalty to get put in a hazmat suit if you don't have to. You don't, and I would say for at least for the most part, it's the same for a road traffic accident. Nobody has a problem, and you're good at cutting. You take that one.
He's the guy that's good on the
yeah, he's good. So nobody gets sad of that. But I've never heard, and I get the feeling it's the same all over the world. And I want your take on it. If I were to turn around the station off and say, "You're not going inside. You're not good enough. I want you and you inside." I haven't even gotten to the point that I know what's going to happen. I just know that it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
Nobody has lifted that can of worms and opened it up.
Yeah, I think that. I mean, this is where the compliance comes in, and you've seen my presentations on the non-negotiables, and really it's the end of the circle in the sense that there's just an equation: the burning building and the crew. Yeah. We try and understand this, and that's difficult enough, but I think that's easier because it's science. And if I go to enough of them, I get some good pattern recognition. Yeah. But this crew, we've always treated them as a constant, and they're not a constant. Now, if this is the equation, if they're greater or equal to the fire, I send them in, right, essentially. But if the fire is greater than them, we stay outside until we can go in. Yeah. But to do that, I've got to know the fire, which I've spent a lot of time trying to come to grips with. But like I said, if I see enough of it and I have enough time, it's pretty black and white in some cases because I can make some sense of it. But if I don't know these guys, I'm going to get the equation wrong. And so all I did was say, well, what what would be the minimum I want them to do to stay safe in there?
Yeah.
Let's just make that the minimum so I can draw a line through some of these variables. And that was the basis of it. But it was a long conversation with the crews that said, let's have a contract here. If this guy over here is going to send you into a burning building, you've got to do some stuff for him. Otherwise, we'll get someone else. No, we don't get anyone else. There is no one else. No. But there's that sense that, you know, this is a job where we've got shared expectations. Yeah. And I started that process by saying to the SOs in front of the crew, I said, why would you go offensive instead of defensive? And the answer was always the same. I'll send my guys in. This is assuming that going in, you get better outcomes, which I think we can argue in most cases. And he said, if they can be safe. Yeah. And I said, okay, so there's probably certain things they're doing. And they said, yeah. And I said, stop. Then I turned to the crew and said, tell me 4 things you think he wants you to do. Otherwise, he wouldn't have sent you in. And then we sort of worked back from that. And they all came up with the same 4. They came up with some other ones as well. Yeah. And so it was really just saying, well, right, you know, I don't want to be at a fire and I send a crew in. I think they're putting water on it, but the thing seems to be getting worse. And then I look around the side and they're scrambling out a window and I say, what happened? Well, we were searching the room. And I go, well, wait a minute. I thought you were putting the fire out. Oh, no. We went past a room. We thought we'd better search it. Suddenly we've got this mismatch. And that's where problems occur. So it's just a sense of, when I was in training, I sent guys away at the end of the day. Everyone was happy and see you next year or whatever and who we got tomorrow. But then I'm back in operations for the last 3 years and I'm sending guys into burning buildings and I'm not quite sure they're going to do what I think they're going to do. So that was sort of that fundamental pragmatic says, well, let's just work out what we all think is important and have that conversation. And
okay, I need to really go, but I also really need one more question.
Sure. Absolutely.
So one of the let's take an example. So you make a simple rule says you can always cool smoke. Like you could argue how much you cool, but let's say you should always cool smoke, and you do that.
Yep.
And then you try to enforce that, or put that into effect into an organization, and the feedback you get is, which you're going to get on basically all the question is.
Yep.
You think that their skill level is here, so you simplify to that level. You for a host of reasons you decide that, well, deciding if you're going to cool or not is too complicated, and the consequences you say of cooling too much you think is not that bad, and so on.
Yep.
So you make that decision, and then just compare it to all other skills. You
essentially, to say it really easily, I think that it's impossible to distinguish when you need to and when you don't.
Yeah, and I would agree. Yep. So let's say, but that's just for this question. It doesn't really matter. Is that you just make it's like this is where I think our non-negotiables should be like, and then you have other people who may or may not know more than you, and so on. Probably less than you, and they have a different opinion on how good the firefighters are. This you say,
sure.
In my context, it would be, Lars, how could you say that you should use that much water? We will create a lot of water damages. And my perspective is, well, I don't think firefighters are good enough, and they say, well, we think they are. So you're going to have that in general sense. I think that you and me would have the same problem, that we are trying to actually limit the amount of possibilities for the firefighters because we don't think they're good enough, or think it's too hard and not enough training and so on. And you have superiors or other colleagues that think they're better than they are. How do you find that to be a problem?
Yes and no. I mean, I care about 14 fire stations on C Platoon because I have the compliance and I have that relationship. And I would nearly say 14 is too many. I'd like to have just 5 or 6 companies, if you like, but I've got 14. So my involvement in those conversations gives me a chance to get to a point where we all agree that some level of throwing some water around on the way to the fire is a benefit. Now, getting back to what I know or don't know or someone else, the reason I came to that is because I could not tell you whether or not I should be gas cooling, let alone, you know what I mean?
I don't know either.
Yeah, exactly. So my guys tend not to worry about water damage in the sense that they're normally running 115 to 230 litres per minute. It's not a lot of water to start with. They'll be using a fog. They'll be turning it on and off as we do. It's not a concern. I mean, I had a fire on my last shift 2 days ago. the unit below, we had water coming through the electrics, and I sort of said, I would have rather have not seen that.
Yeah.
But I certainly, we had a bit of a joke about it. Well, that was such and such, and he probably could have done a better. That's him. But the fire's out, and they did it. So in the debrief, we'd probably drill down a little bit and sort of say, well, could we have avoided that? I suspect that was going out of the laundry into the roof space. But anyway, and we'll have a talk about it. But it's not a big deal with us, to be totally honest. But we're already running relatively low flow rates.
But I mean, it is that circle we started off, Doug. Like I started off thinking I know everything, and then I learned more, and I realized everything depends. And you want everybody to be up here in this level, so everybody should be fully dynamic, make all the best decision, nothing to be SOPs, no rule of thumbs, no dynamics, because you can't really make anything that works. So everything has to be that. And then you go back, circle back, because you realize not everyone is a fire nerd spending all my time. And even I, like you said, I don't even know myself when to cool or not. I just throw some around and just I get to hope it works. And
I'm hearing you.
Yeah. And then you circle back. And again, what I find is that I circle back to an anticipated level of the performance firefighters are at much lower than I started at. So I didn't circle back. I circled back at, gee, I'm happy they have their BA on the right side of their face. So the mask is not back here; it's actually here sometimes. Your
cylinder's not upside down.
Yes, well, you have firefighters that are on even on full-time stations. So you kind of go this is not believable.
We're in frequent wearers of BA. We're in frequent wearers of BA. Now, what anyone says, but look, I think that you and I are much closer than we think we are. I mean, we can split hairs about throwing water around, but we're in the same place.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I'm in a position where I can add compliance, I'm much more confident that at least with my guys, we've reached a level of understanding and shared expectation. But it's taken 3 years. And that's not through formal training. That's through informal training with my stations, not formal training through the organisation in a sense. But, I think that's the, that's the whole thing about the non-negotiables is that people struggle, our peers struggle with it because they think it's a return to the old days where you must do this and you must do this and you must do this. There's lots of things that depend. I've just tried to get rid of a few of those variables and tried to break it. Now, I can't break that. And I'm happy with it because I'm the one sending them into a burning building. My officers are happy with it because they're getting shared expectations. But I know it's a gut reaction says we don't want to go back there to that black and white days where you must do this, must do this. We should have pens and versatile firefighters. Yeah, we'd all love that. But, there's also some things that, that must be done, I think, anyway.
But you have to, like you say, you can to some extent use compliance and saying you have to do this, otherwise you can't.
They know that our boss wants that.
Yeah, I'm in a position where at my retaining station, I have nothing to. I'm at the bottom of every decision.
Which is good because you get to go on the hose.
Yes, this is very good. But the other one when I teach all over the world and I teach in different contexts. I have to sort of adapt to that. But the core learning is to some extent still the same because if I think a certain skill or task is too hard in Sweden, I find it very difficult to see that it's going to be easy in some other country. Sweden has still put a lot of emphasis in understanding and training firefighters and so on. So if it doesn't work in Sweden, for instance, judging how much water you should use when you cool gases or if you should cool or not, taking that example, I go back and say, well, I don't think you should. For instance, let's say you say you should cool all the time, and the feedback you get, but you're underestimating the capability of the firefighters. It's very hard to convince something of the opposite. It's very hard to go say I don't think your firefighters, even though I've never seen them, I've never met them, I don't think your firefighters are as good as you think you are. And I think I have a fairly good, I've talked to so many people about a certain issue. that I feel fairly confident in saying that, even though I've never met them.
But I think there's a reason for that. I think that the physical skill and coordination to handle rescue tools or medical equipment or any of those things, it's just a coordination exercise. The coordination exercise of doing a traditional Swedish type gas cool, I do not see as difficult. But like anything, it needs to be practiced. It's just not being practiced. So it depends how important you think that is. Now, I would suggest that, a large hose with a smooth bore using certain techniques and being good at that would be equally difficult.
Moving a large line is, you put your training. Yeah, that's one of my beef I have with some of the ones saying that fog is too complicated. Go like, well, sure, if you do a smooth bore with a half-inch, that would be easy. But if you do it in 2.5 inch, you're going to put as much time into nozzle handling.
But I think it's how much importance you want to put on that. I mean, and for me, sending guys into burning building, we've decided as a group of 14 stations that we think that that's where our risk is. And not necessarily a risk to us, but a risk to the success of the operation. And that's what the public expects. And we should be good at that. And I still don't see crews practicing every day. But you would think in a 24-hour period you could put aside an hour or two, but they don't. It seems to me that hose work is certainly in an Australian context. It's sort of like they'll practice for a little bit and they'll go, I'm pretty good at this.
Yeah, but again, I think it's the benchmark. They go like, if I roll out a hose and I drag it on the pavement, I'm pretty good at this. I know. Like, and I go like, okay, so that's your.
There's kudos in my 14 stations because they know I want them to be good at it.
Yeah.
So they will get kudos from me by saying, hey, you're good at it. But in a lot of stations, there isn't that feedback loop. So
nobody in charge. Again, it's a leadership issue. Nobody in charge has said that this is important. And again, and the other one's saying that if they say it's important, how do you benchmark that so that you know that you're not as good as you want to be?
Yeah. Well, that's the back end. That's where the science comes in. That's the back end. But just a simple saying, if someone turned up to your house and you'd found refuge and you were waiting for them to come in and get you, how good do you want them to be? And it's sort of, we use that just as this is our back to earth type statement, just always benchmark it against that.
Well, I think you're correct. Damn it. I would like to talk more.
We can have part two.
Yeah, well, I mean, we could be more specific. I really like this conversation about sort of the circle coming back and and the value of simplicity. And I think I got a lot of that from the Americans too, which is one of the things I've taken away from my frequent visits to America about the view of simplicity. And what can you, like you said, non-negotiable, what can you make as simple as possible to free up cognitive capabilities toward the things that has to be dynamic?
Absolutely.
And to get that, but I still, like we still struggle with both deciding myself what is simple enough but still flexible and dynamic, and also, which is a equally hard problem, how do I sell it to individuals or organizations who think they're better than they are? Like if I go to a firefight in Sweden and say, I don't think you're good enough to handle a fog, or you either have to train more or you have to use a straight stream. They would go like,
another interesting thing is too, you have to be better than them.
Yeah.
And we have instructors that aren't better than them. And it's very hard to tell people they should be X if you're not X, you know what I mean? It's just that credibility issue. There's a whole range of issues there. But I delivered a presentation in the 3D firefighting course earlier this year, and it wasn't about the non-negotiables. It was how to have that conversation. That's the important thing. How do you get the buy-in? So it makes sense, because no one's going to do something that doesn't make sense.
No. Excellent, John. I need to go. I need to pick up my kid.
No
He's standing there sad. His father's not coming.
No worries at all. It's been great talking to you. We'll have part two perhaps, eh?
Yeah. Bye-bye.
And see you, Lars. Bye-bye.